there's a portion, there's a traffic circle here you can see here as you're crossing. There's on-street parking out loud on one side of the street plus shoulder parking. There's just some odd issues going on here. And so there's not a complete sidewalk between Walter Reed and Glebe. And I'm sure most of you know a lot about complete streets, and if you know about complete streets, you know that not having a sidewalk is one of the worst things that's possible. So that's why we want to work on this project. The second project, proposed project, is in Arlington Mill, the Arlington Mill neighborhood. So here's one view, and here's a second view, and I'll go back to the first for a second. So this is 7th Road South, Tyrell Hills Park, South Florida Street. So this is an interesting project because we'll be able to leverage some work that Arlington Transit's already done to improve some of the pedestrian crossings and other pedestrian safety improvements. They've already done some of the work, so this is a nice way for us to co-leverage funding. We don't have a lot of it, so we're trying to maximize what we have. This area has some speeding issues, a history of crashes, heavy volume, and there's a lot of transit. It's a heavy transit route. So this one definitely made sense. And this is, so both of these projects, the Douglas Park, the Arlington Mill, and the other project that we're currently a little stalled on, we're, I believe, tied for third on the list of projects, something like that. Very high on the list, point is. So those are two capital projects that we're working on, and like I said, we'll be ready to talk to you a little bit more about them next meeting, and we're of course willing to answer questions when we're done with this presentation. But I also wanted to touch on our potential changes, our suggested changes to our program documents. So the program has 3 guiding documents: our charter, which is a charter that explains what we do, as most charters do. A program guide that offers guidance on how the program works and how projects are proposed and how they go through the process. And then finally, project ranking guidelines. And so this is one of our big objectives as a program, is to have the most objective metrics that we possibly can in assessing projects, and have any project be able to be assessed as a desktop exercise, which means they can be assessed quickly and they don't involve a tremendous amount of staff resources in order to figure out how severe the problem is. And so after last couple of years, like I said, we are looking at proposing a set of edits to all 3 of these documents. So the charter is sort of the minimal edits just to reflect some realities of the way the commission's been operating. And then we also specifically added a pedestrian advisory committee position. We already have a representative from PAC, but we wanted to make it clear and make it part of the charter that they would always be represented. And so that's somewhat minimal, pretty minimal edits. The program guide has a lot more edits that we've made. We've shortened it substantially and really just made it more in line with county policy guidance, including the MTP and the 6-step guide to public engagement. The other important update we're suggesting to the program guide is the creation of a 2-tier or 2-track system for programs or projects, excuse me. So first would be capital projects. So we're defining these as projects with a more expansive scope, higher projected costs, and that require more intensive interventions. These are things like streets missing a sidewalk on both sides, the sidewalk is incomplete or obstructed, or other instances with serious safety and accessibility issues. So these would be the projects take a bit longer, probably have a bit more intensive public engagement process as well, and be definitely more expensive. But then we also identified a second track, which would be tactical projects. So these would be projects that are relatively limited in scope, lower cost, and could be completed relatively quickly, and probably also have a limited geographic scope. Because this could be like a 2-block street segment where, frankly, we could, with staff, we could throw up some paint and some bollards and maybe solve a problem, or at least get closer to solving it, and do that very quickly, within a year, hopefully, so that we can actually solve problems in a more quick fashion and help make things safer for people. And so those are the 2 tracks that we're suggesting, and we're suggesting that staff review projects and make recommendations to the commission about which track it belongs in, and then the commission decides to move forward with it. But I'll also note that our updates to the program guide suggest that even if a project gets tactical measures, it doesn't mean it's out of the running to get capital measures. If those tactical measures aren't providing the relief and the safety improvements, the accessibility improvements that are needed, then we would certainly still consider it for more intensive interventions. So the most significant sort of set of changes that we're proposing, so that's the program guide, number 2. Number 3, the project ranking guidelines. So these are the most significant set of changes we're proposing. So there's a couple of bullets here. So the ranking guidelines, like I said, are designed to be as objective as possible. And so, but also reflect reality and, again, ability to do them as a desktop exercise. That is important, partly because of our data bottleneck. We had an issue getting speed and traffic counts. We needed to do about 150 of them, and there was quite a large procurement issue with getting a contractor to do them. And then once we did them, very few projects that were had those studies done had what is defined as a speeding problem in our guidelines. So we tried to adjust our criteria based on that and based on a few things. So we used to have 2 groups, Group 1, Group 2, and you had to pass a certain threshold in Group 1 to even get to Group 2, right? The problem had to be severe enough so that we would finish ranking it. So now what we've created is sort of 2 tiers within Group 1. You can see here first is anything with a red asterisk, by the way, is something that we're proposing to change. Sidewalk conditions, we just changed point values associated with that, and also cleared up the way that the wording was in the ranking guidelines, so it was clear. So you can get points for having no complete sidewalk or a narrow or obstructed sidewalk, and then you can also get an additional bump if you are missing curb ramps. And so then also traffic hazards and safety, if you have a reported crash in the past 48 months. So a crash can be, somebody sideswiping a car, or a crash can be a pedestrian in a car, or a bicyclist, all kinds of crashes. So if you have a crash, you get 4 points with up to a maximum of 8 points. But then in order to reflect focus on Vision Zero and safety and how important this is, we tweaked the crash category here to add a crash with physical injury. So if there's a crash with a physical injury, you can get up to 6 points based on severity, and up to a maximum of 12 points. Just to reflect, again, that having an injury associated with it is the worst, and then a severe injury or a death is definitely the worst. So if you have that, you automatically get, you pass go. And collect $200. There's no other, you don't need anything else. And so this kind of is reflecting that. And you can see here, so you see A and B, you have to reach a minimum in that Group 1, A plus B, of 8 points before you get bumped to the next level, which is speed and volume. So if you have a speeding problem, traffic volumes of certain amounts, you get different points based on those things. And then again, you have to have a minimum number of points from A plus B plus C in order to get to the next level. Now, I know this seems overly complicated, but what we're trying to do is reflect that some problems are more severe than other problems, and define what severity means and what is bad or worse, and put those things higher, basically, or give them more weight, and that you have to sort of pass certain thresholds before getting to the next level. So that's in Group 1. And then in Group 2, we made a few changes. So once you've passed those thresholds, you've got the 12 minimum points, then you go to this level. And you can see we have a bunch of stuff here in terms of things that are pedestrian attractors. And again, the asterisk mostly reflects point totals or point amounts that we've changed. We changed schools to have a maximum. Previously, there was no max. And there's a few neighborhoods in Arlington where you can really get a gajillion points because your house is near 5 schools. And so we just set a max to kind of reflect the reality of that. And then, made a couple other tweaks, including bumping up on the mapped bike route section, bumping up the amount of points you get if it connects with a trail. So again, just changing and based on some realities and some things that we felt were needed more prominence. And so what happens is once a project goes through all these, your Group 1 plus 2 score, is your final score, right? And that's where you end up on the list. And so it's a lot. I went through it quickly, and we spent many hours as a subcommittee and as a full commission going through this. And so, this reflects a very sort of detailed level of conversation. And so not that any commission in Arlington doesn't do anything without a ton of deliberation, but just wanted to let you know that our commission has spent a significant amount of time thinking and talking about these things. But so that basically wraps up my presentation. I want to say thank you and let you know that we are open to questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all of your hard work within the committee on revising your program guide. These kind of nuts and bolts quantitative ranking systems are some of the hardest work that we do in planning.
Really? What do you mean?
Yeah, just trying to measure how much you should prioritize the safety problems on one street versus another is just,
exactly.
That's really tough work. Did anybody on the commission have questions for former Commissioner Ortiz? Commissioner Bros?
I was just going to say, as a representative, the Transportation Commissioner representing on the Complete Streets Commission, I just want to commend Elisa and Michelle for their leadership on that, on the commission. I joined when we were in the midst of this bottleneck, and it was really a rough time, and they brought us through that very well. And so, and this review that she's just described has been a really good piece of work, and so commend them and the committee, but lots of good work to look at. So. Thank you.
Awesome. Anything else? Commissioner Raddick?
Did you figure out how to define a speeding problem? If you could just quickly kind of go over that.
Yeah, so I have it here somewhere on one of my many pieces of paper. Here we go. A speeding problem exists when the 85th percentile speed on the affected streets meet or exceed 5 miles per hour over the posted speed limit for at least a period of 24 hours or another appropriate time period determined by staff. In other words, more than 15% of the drivers on the street travel more than 5 miles per hour over the posted speed limit. So that's a traffic engineering definition that the county uses, and so that is what we use. So that is how a speeding problem is defined.
Great. Anybody else? Commissioner Lantalmi?
How do you define a civic building? Because you have that as one of the criteria.
Go ahead. I think it's like school and library and get a specific list of.
It could include a hospital, a post office, DMV, things that are attractors of a public nature.
And why would that be different than the supermarket or a Starbucks or something like that?
Because these are public spaces that the group thought needed to be called out as attractors of pedestrian activity potentially, and that people needed to arrive to them safely.
Yeah,
We do
I'm not-
also have a designation for commercial buildings
great.
as well.
Okay, that's fine.
What we did was we split one category into 3 separate ones, including calling out parks.
That would
We
be-
didn't have any points awarded for being adjacent to a park, which we figured out was kind of a missing feature.
Okay, and a civic would be like a church, synagogue, a mosque, something like that too?
Could be.
Could be. I don't think we got to that level of detail. We've been trying to sort of both offer clear direction, but also not hamstring staff in terms of making their own judgments, based on their expertise.
I'd encourage it to be the broader definition, to be able to pull things in.
In my head, a civic building is more, I would say, lean more toward, like I said, the DHS building, or like places where you might be required to go as a citizen, like you have to go to the DMV sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a choice. That makes it sound awful, but I don't mean it that way, but like, as opposed to a supermarket where you can decide to maybe go one supermarket or another supermarket. Does that make, that's my own personal, like, in my head, I think, like, you might have to go to the county office building, you might have to
You
go
can
to the
say the same
DMV,
thing
but-
about post offices, because I can choose between different post offices, which I go to, and I do.
Fair
I
enough.
always go to the same one.
I think the idea is they were public facilities, but in the past, whenever we've had issues of interpretation, we've worked it out with the commission in a pretty iterative process. So my suspicion is now that you've raised it, we will discuss it.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? All right, we'll see you next month.
Okay, thank you, we appreciate it.
The next item is item number 3. This is 1900 Crystal Drive site plan and the Crystal City PDSP. This is an action item. I'll turn it over to the applicant for an overview.
All right, here to talk about both 1900 Crystal Drive and the PDSP application that's in for a variety of sites in Crystal City. We're going to start with the PDSP, actually, which I think we might have pulled up the wrong slides. All right, that looks better. Sorry about that. Here to talk about the PDSP. The applicant's submitting to tie 3 non-contiguous sites together for the purpose of setting maximum densities for the sites and a framework for a community benefits package. We saw a variety of benefits to doing it this way as opposed to the more piecemeal 4.1 application process that this won't replace. It's a supplement to it. We see the ability to share significant community benefits across sites. You'll see we're offering a number of park sites and libraries, things that are pretty large community benefits that one project in and of itself probably couldn't sustain. We see the, us getting certainty for us as the developer, the community, the county to agree upon all these items up front. Ability to plan projects more holistically. So instead of, again, looking piece by piece, ending up with 5 libraries and 0 parks to plan holistically. More efficient process for everyone, for us to be here and talk about this one time and negotiate it in one process. Accelerated timing and certainty for everyone. And again, to note, all these projects are consistent with the Crystal City Sector Plan. All of the projects will go through the SPRC processes, Transportation Commission, LRPC, and have full community input. This is simply a framework that sets maximum densities and community benefits. So with that, these are the 3 sites on the left. This is actually left is south on pretty much all of our slides. 2300 Crystal Drive and 223 23rd Street. 2 towers, one will be residential apartments, one will be office. The middle site, 1900 Crystal Drive, which has an 4.1 that we'll be sharing with you in a few minutes here. 2 residential towers. And then all the way on the right, which is the north end of Crystal City, 101 12th Street and 201 12th Street. 201 12th Street is an existing building. 101 12th Street will be a building added on its site area. It's an office building. So here's an overview of the densities that are proposed for each of these buildings. 223 23rd, again, 1 resi building, 1 office building, each about 500,000 square feet. With ground floor retail, it's about 1 million square feet in total. 1900 Crystal Drive, about 830 square feet in total, most of which is residential. And 101 12th Street is an office building, 550 square feet in total. Again, that's divided between 101 12th and 201 12th. 201 12th is existing. And then on the right-hand sides here, we can see the base and bonus breakdown. So we're proposing about 2.5 million total square feet, of which 1.45 would be base density and the rest would be bonus. So this is a proposed benefits package for 1 million square feet of maximum additional bonus density. So this next slide, just a quick rundown of the benefits package that's proposed. With open spaces, a 45,000 square foot easement for Center Park, which is adjacent to 1900 Crystal Drive. It's between Bell Street and Crystal Drive, right near the Crystal City Metro Station. A 55,000 square foot dedication of Gateway Park that would be dedicated in fee to the county. That's at the northern end of Crystal Drive by the 101 12th site. And the applicant would propose to fund the design and engagement processes for planning these parks. Transportation-wise, proposing a sector plan improvement that's called for between 10th and 12th Streets near the 101 12th site, which would be a new connector road. Affordable housing, proposing 83,000 square feet of committed affordable units at 60% AMI. These would be existing units at the River House apartment development. These are units that exist today, and we're excited that we can offer them to the community, not when a project delivers, but at the outset of the development to get them in the community sooner. And a community facility that we've heard from many folks in the community that they're very excited about, would be about 7,200 square feet of library space in the 1901 South Bell Street building, right on the Center Park space. That will be a public park right near the Crystal City Metro, and very excited about that. So that's an overview of the PDSP package. We can transition now to 1900 Crystal Drive, which you're here for as well. This is an overview of Crystal City. Our red box here shows what has traditionally been called the Malls block in Crystal City. It's a super block bounded by 18th Street, 20th Street, Crystal Drive, and Route 1. It has 5 buildings on it. They're all over one shared below-grade garage that stretches basically the entirety of that red box. The blue outline is 1900 Crystal Drive. It was an existing office building, which is what's depicted in this image. It's been demolished as of last summer, and adjacent to, well, a little bit from the existing Crystal City Metro entrance and exit, directly adjacent to the proposed Metro station. Just a zoomed in view here, we can see the buildings on the site. 1801 and 1901 South Bell are both office buildings, as is 1800 South Bell. 1800 South Bell has Amazon that started moving into that building, and the Crystal City Marriott. These are some existing conditions. At the top of the page, you'll see the photos taken from Bell Street. And then at the bottom from Crystal Drive, you'll note the grade change. If you look at the top photos, you can see those colorful retaining walls. And by the time you're looking at the photos at the bottom down at Crystal Drive, those have become a lot taller. So we lose about 15 feet as we go across the site from west to east, which has driven a number of our design considerations. So an overview of the development program for 1900 Crystal Drive. Again, 2 residential towers. So between the North Tower and South Tower, we're at 811 units, about 780,000 square feet of residential, 40,000 square feet of ground floor retail, and a parking ratio of about 0.36 per unit. Here's some of the pretty renderings. One of the goals throughout this development was to break down the monotony of Crystal City, break down these large super blocks that all look the same. The South Tower, which is on the left here, has these terracotta and precast undulating panels. Throughout the building, a lot of curves, a lot of organic shapes, a very biophilic building. All the balconies going up and down the sides will have plantings on them. And in contrast, the building on the right, which is the North Tower, a lot more rectilinear, kind of Jenga-esque, white and black contrast, again, to kind of break up the monotony. The next image is just a closer view of the South Tower where we can see a little more detail of those curvy panels and some of the biophilic elements, the green canopy kind of above the first floor. The next slide will be the North Tower where we can see the architecture lands much more firmly on the ground, a little more traditional in nature, with some of this handcrafted Roman brick on the ground or the first few levels. This is a basic site plan of the site. Again, Crystal Drive down on the bottom of the page, Richmond Highway up at the top, 18th on the right, 20th on the left. So 2 towers proposed right on Crystal Drive, and a new network of connections going through the site. So going left to right is this north-south connection to function as both loading and service entries as well as a retail alley. And then going east-west, which is north, or which is up and down on this page, would be a proposed connection going from Crystal Drive to the new Center Park, which will be an easement with the PDSP process. That's the green area, would be this proposed 45,000 square foot easement, proposing, again, to negotiate that grade change, a monumental stair in the middle there at the terminus of that east-west connection to get you down from the park to Crystal Drive, hoping a lot of folks will take advantage of kind of the cut through to getting out of the Metro entrance up at the top of the page, cutting through the park, down the stairs to Crystal. Next page, a more detailed view of this site plan, showing the different elements of the site. You can see we've located the residential entries, not on Crystal Drive, but on this new east-west connection across from each other. Thought it was important to pull some of that loading or drop off, pick up, loading from Amazon or things like that off of Crystal. And on this north-south connection has a lot of the loading, true loading dock functions, garage entry, the monumental stair, and a fair amount of retail. Again, try to get those functions off of the main streets so they're entirely internal to the site. So I wanted to talk a little bit about street network. This was very integral to our planning of the site. Since you'll note we have some new connections throughout the site. So we looked at Crystal City in context to some really walkable and dense neighborhoods that we've seen be very successful. These are all drawn to the same scale. The map on the bottom is Crystal City. You can see we have very long blocks as you go kind of in both directions, particularly up Crystal Drive, 1,000-foot long block, 550 feet, 650 feet. And this just is very monotonous today combined with the architecture and just not a very kind of pedestrian friendly environment. Compared to some of the examples on the top, New York is an example that a lot of people just know. As you walk up the streets, you'll see that's about 275 feet. Avenue to avenue, a much longer distance. It's a lot harder to kind of traverse the city that way. Portland, Oregon, the next example, we've seen as one of the best examples of a walkable urban downtown that also works with the density. A street grid, a pretty regular street grid of 250 by 250 feet. And some more local examples on the right, DuPont Circle, which has about 270 feet between streets. And Clarendon here in Arlington, which is a little more irregular, but 270, 280, 240, kind of in that range. So we wanted to look at how to kind of replicate this and try to break up, the very large super blocks in Crystal City. So the next image, we took that Portland strict 250 by 250 overlay and dropped it down on Crystal City. And we were kind of surprised how perfectly it fit. That those grayish grid lines are Portland. We drew on in red some of the existing streets in Crystal that kind of match up pretty well. And one of the other things that really struck us was how this grid exists pretty much everywhere else in Arlington, and particularly here right across Route 1. You can see at the top of the page, the existing single-family neighborhoods have this about 250-foot spacing in blocks. So one of our primary goals in planning the whole site was to kind of reintroduce this grid east of Route 1 and kind of start to increase the porosity throughout the site. So this slide kind of illustrates our proposed circulation. On the left is the sector plan, on the right is our plan. Again, we thought the sector plan didn't propose maybe enough porosity that we might want to see today. So on the right, our proposed plan of this east-west connection, which would be a single lane, one-way, right turn only off of Crystal Drive, spilling off into an alley, which would be two ways, serving a lot of the loading and entry functions. The two residential lobbies, again, would be on that east-west connection, and then parking access loading would be on the alley. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this east-west connection. We saw it get a lot of attention when we were at Transportation Commission for our info item and throughout the community process. This is where we ended up as a rendering of that space. We're pretty pleased with how it turned out. With all the input, we think it can be a very active and flexible connection between Crystal Drive and the new north-south alley, and somewhere where kind of all modes of transportation can have equal importance and feel equally as safe using this space. So the next slide shows a more detailed section of everything that's going on here. The middle space would be a truly shared zone where we expect cars, pedestrians, bicyclists, everyone to use. And again, this whole section would be curbless, but we did hear from the community that since this hasn't been done maybe very much in Arlington, that folks would like some refuge if they didn't feel entirely comfortable intermingling with all the modes. So on the sides of this section, we have dedicated sidewalk zones for traditional sidewalk modes of transportation. And in the middle, to break that up, cafe zones, which you might have noticed in the previous rendering, have planters, and we'll see on the next page a variety of other safety measures to keep folks feeling safe no matter what they're doing in this space. So this next slide illustrates some of these safety measures. So working from the bottom of the page up, which is moving from Crystal Drive to the park. Again, see some of those planters lining the true cartway of the space. In the middle area, that cartway kind of splays out to allow for drop-off activities. We placed bollards between the true edge of that area meant for cars and the rest of the space. And as we move to the top, a pedestrian tabletop, so that kind of light gray area on the plan would be raised up. So cars coming north and south down the alley would be enticed to slow down as they go over that kind of big speed bump. I think that's really important to allow pedestrians to feel safe to get across to the park. And for those coming down from the park, have made sure to set back the monumental staircase 10 feet from any potential car activity with large planners. Again, to make sure everyone has the opportunity to get into the space, adjust to it, and figure out how to safely traverse it. And if we can go back to that slide, what we've also tried to do here, you'll note again, all the loading and parking entries are on that north-south alley at the top of the page. So we thought this design of the space is very flexible, that the east-west connection could be closed off if we have a special event, a farmer's market, something where we might just want it to be all pedestrian at certain times, has the flexibility in that design. So again, we're really excited about this idea of a curbless street. We've seen it probably 10 years ago, maybe something more of an emerging trend that was coming from Europe, but I think we've seen it kind of solidify itself in a variety of examples throughout the country and locally. Here are just a few. Seattle has been very successful with several examples. This is Bell Street Park. Indianapolis and Denver as well, very vibrant, active, and dense areas. Having these curbless streets which really bring vitality kind of year-round and throughout the day to different spaces, as well as downtown Brooklyn now on a larger scale, considering making their entire downtown curbless. The next slide will show some local examples that we think are working pretty well as well. Georgetown Waterfront has been around for a while, has a network of kind of curbless streets that go around it and function for drop-off activities as well as pedestrian and bicycle circulation. The Wharf is something we're particularly excited about and look to. Most of those streets are curbless, and if you guys have been there recently, you might notice it was originally intended to all be a shared street with cars and pedestrians. Certain spaces now are always solely for pedestrians. Certain spaces are always shared, and there are a number of spaces kind of in between, depending on what event's going on. If it's a weekend, weekday, that can be closed off to pedestrians or closed off to cars or function as shared spaces. And that's how we'd like to look at our space, is that it can be flexible. And it would be really great if we have some great programming on the weekends and it's super busy. We close it down to cars, and during the week it's open, or some permutation of that is the vision for this space. So in addition to those kind of issues, we saw some more functional issues that the proposed circulation addresses. If we could go to the next slide. And that's pickup and drop off. We've seen throughout pretty much the metro area, and probably particularly Crystal Drive, I think we're all familiar with some of the issues that come up with Ubers, the Grubhub guy, Amazon delivery person, double parked, whether it's in the bike lane, in the drive lanes, and that really creates just a nuisance for people and really a safety concern. So what we've tried to do is to solve that issue by having this ability to drop off cars right off, or drop off items, food, whatever it might be, off of Crystal Drive. And we've heard some commentary that our proposed solution might create more traffic. So these are just two diagrams to illustrate if there were no cars on the east-west connection and all internal drop-off pickup occurred on the alley, kind of the turning maneuvers that would be required if you're coming southbound on Crystal. On the scenario on the left, you could go down to 20th, wrap around through the alley, and end up spilling onto 18th Street, which is a number of turns and kind of engages all of the different roads on the site. On the right-hand side, if you were to make the turn onto 18th, then you'd have to cross traffic, make a left turn onto the alley, then you're back at 20th and have to engage in that road as well to either get back to Crystal Drive or Richmond Highway. So the next page, again, shows our kind of solution here of a simple right-hand turn into the site. And then once you get to the north-south alley, I think this provides optionality, which is something really important in cities and urban planning, to be able to say, you know, I want to go back out to Crystal, so I'll go up to 18th so I can make the right, or choose to go to 20th and really choose the most efficient route. We also think having these drop-offs occur on the east-west alley and having cars allowed on the alley allows us to address the buildings off of that east-west connection, meaning that for any Uber or delivery service, the GPS would send you onto the east-west connection, allowing you not to back up Crystal Drive. In the other case, we're just continually afraid that cars are just going to stop in the middle of Crystal and block the different lanes on that road. Delving into some street sections. This one is off Crystal Drive, pretty much remaining as is today, with 3 travel lanes, a transit lane, and a parking lane, and 2 bike lanes. Going to 20th Street, a slight modification here, turning this into a 3-lane section with 2 parking lanes on either side. And then looking at 18th, we have submitted a proposed plan at the top left, as well as this optional plan. The difference being the optional plan removes a travel lane and inserts protected bike lanes. This is something we could deliver with delivery of this building on the south side, on the 1900 side of the block. We're a foot or 2 short of getting the additional protected bike lane on the north side. But when that 4.1 application delivers its corner building, I think that could be a really great way to get a protected bike lane on both sides of 18th Street. And this is a section of the north-south alley. You can see the travel lane marked in the middle and the walkways on the sides. We haven't delved into this space a lot, but there would be differentiated paving to kind of call out a pedestrian zone on the side, but again, be curbless and allow folks to traverse as they see fit. And then looking at this east-west connection, which we have been into in depth, again, showing the dedicated pedestrian ways on the side, a seating area in the middle, and a travel lane, or sorry, seating areas kind of to the sides as well, and a travel lane in the middle. Okay, getting on to parking. The site currently has 1,800 spaces in that big shared garage that takes up the entirety of the super block. When we go to construct this building, we will have to demolish the portion of the garage that sits below the 2 towers. You can see this on the images on the top right. These are the existing garage plans for the different levels. We'll have to demolish that to get down to the foundation level and set larger foundations to handle the larger buildings. So because of that, we plan to refill the box we have to build anyway with parking. So we're actually reducing the parking count on the site to a total of 1,500 spaces. And again, the number was strictly driven by refilling the box that's already dug on the site. So below the building will be 289 spaces, which will be dedicated for the new residential building. That equates to a 0.36 ratio. We think this is likely sufficient for the building. It's in line for recent approvals in the area. If we turn out that there's overflow parking from the residential needed, luckily the other uses on this site are office. So we've worked with staff to come up with an opportunity for shared parking, where if there's excess residential demand, which peaks at night, when office workers have gone home, they can spill over into the existing garage and use that excess parking. The next slide here is bike parking. We've listened to a lot of feedback from Transportation Commission, staff, the community, and we're excited to have worked it all in. So we're offering 1-to-1 bike parking, so 1 bike parking space per unit, and covered secure Arlington standard indoor bike spaces. About 300 of those spaces will be at grade. And this is the area that's kind of called out in greater detail at the bottom of the sheet. You can see the large bike room, and something we also heard from a lot of folks in this room was a need for scooter parking, for covered visitor parking, and a bike repair station. So we're excited to offer that in this area as well, all kind of open to the public and unsecured outside of the secured room. Additionally, the below grade spaces can be accessed from grade through a dedicated jump elevator that will serve both to get you from the alley up to New Center Park and also down into the bike levels. So you'll be able to access pretty much all of these spaces very easily without lugging your bike through a fancy lobby or down a staircase or anything like that. And for the transportation impact analysis, I'll have Grove Slane to handle that.
All right, thanks, Eric. Good evening, I'm Dan Van Pelt with Grove Slade. I'm going to walk through the transportation analysis. We did perform a multimodal transportation assessment for this, and so just touch on the highlights with you this evening. So I think you're all pretty acquainted with the site. I think Eric did a great job of locating the site. It's very walkable, walk score of 86. We're very close to the Crystal City Metro Station, just across the street. And as Eric said, the future proposed metro station will be just right immediately across the street from the site. VRE is nearby, short walk, there's 10 bus routes, and there's a well-connected pedestrian and bicycle network. We'll talk more about that. But talking about the transit first, again, the metro station across the street and the second entrance to the Crystal City Metro Station with service to the blue and the yellow line. VRE, 5-minute walk to the Manassas and the Fredericksburg lines. The Crystal City Multimodal Center is right nearby with Metro Bus, 3 routes there, the ART 43 and Metroway, and then there's additional bus connectivity within a half-mile. The pedestrian facilities, it is a well-connected network with transit options and also retail options. There'll be additional retail options with the project that's happening up the street, the Central District Retail Project. Most sidewalks meet the minimum requirements for width and accessibility standards. And this proposed plan, as Eric went into in his presentation, greatly improves the pedestrian connectivity and porosity with the new east-west streets and the east-west and north-south connections through the site. Bicycle facilities, there are bike lanes on Crystal Drive. There's bike lanes on 18th Street to the west of the site, and bike lanes also on Eads Street. And as Eric pointed out, there's a potential for a future additional bike lanes on 18th Street in front of the site. Future cycle track is envisioned as part of the sector plan that would go on Bell Street, and there's 2 capital bike share stations, one on South Bell and one on Crystal Drive. So the MMTA was scoped with the county, as we do with all of our studies. There were 13 intersections that were considered, and those are shown here on the slide on the right. And it did incorporate the new roadway network that is created with this project. One thing to point out is that the previous life on the site was office, and then we also entitled a larger office building here. So we're going to a residential land use, which actually means that our number of trips that we're going to generate is negligible, and actually less than what the office that was approved for the site would have generated on the network. So our studies found that there was really one signal timing adjustment that would be needed at South Clark at 20th Street, essentially the traffic that's trying to get from 20th out onto Clark into Route 1. So that could be adjusted, signal timing adjustment could mitigate that impact. And then other mitigations would include the enhanced site design elements in the transportation management plan. And so speaking of the TMP, here are the elements of the transportation management plan, and it includes all of the things that we would expect in Arlington. And I think one of the things, as Eric pointed out, there are robust on-site bike facilities, which I think is something that is a great amenity of the project. And so I think with that concludes our presentation, and we're here for your questions.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Commissioners. Robert Gibson from Arlington DES Transportation. I apologize that this project is quite large and complicated in many ways. The project actually includes 6 different actions and elements that kind of get lost in the 2 buildings that are proposed. But we're going to go through those just for the sake of the record, and I hopefully can get through some of this pretty quickly. The applicant discussed the PDSP. The PDSP was brought forward within the context of the Crystal City Sector Plan. The sector plan identifies PDSP as a tool to achieve envisioned sector plan goals. This is a really unique implementation of a PDSP for the county as it's non-contiguous sites, but it provides an opportunity for the county to achieve benefits in a way that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to achieve. I'm not going to read all this information here for your sake. The applicants talked about the 3 locations that are being brought together under the PDSP, and I'll go into those in more detail. So the site links 3 sites, 1900 Crystal Drive, which is before you tonight, the 101 12th Street South site, and the 223 23rd Street and 2300 Crystal Drive sites, those 2 projects will come before you under final site plans in a later date. What this helps to do is it establishes a maximum amount of additional density that will come forward with these 3 projects combined, and it provides a holistic framework for achieving sector plan goals and community benefits. While each project will have its own process and community engagement and review as this project went through. So these 3 projects in total need to earn just over 1 million square feet of additional bonus density, and the PDSP will provide the mechanism for that. And then this is obviously part of our zoning ordinance that permits the county board to hear these types of cases, and it's specifically also incorporated into the Crystal City sector plan sections of the zoning ordinance. And what this is really doing is it's bringing together a mixture of community benefits directly related to the overarching goals and site-specific sector plan goals for the Crystal City sector plan. And let me go through some of those elements for each of the 3 sites briefly here. Under the 1900 Crystal Drive site, some of the benefits that are being brought forward include under the PDSP include the dedication of 45,000 square feet of easement space in Center Park, along with $300,000 to advance the Center Park master planning effort. There is 41,000 square feet of affordable housing that will be delivered within the River House project at 60% AMI and a mixture of 1 and 2 bedroom units. There's the community facility the applicant discussed, which is the 7,200 square foot library at 20 years of rent-free lease, and then the LEED Silver nature of these 2 buildings. The 101 12th Street South project includes a fee conveyance of the full Gateway Park, which is a little bit over 54,000 square feet, and then another $300,000 contribution for the master planning of Gateway Park. As a transportation element, it delivers the fee dedication of 10th Street connection between 10th and 12th. This is an element which is within the Crystal City sector plan and within the master transportation plan as new streets. In addition to a LEED Silver building for this site. And then the PDSP elements for 223 23rd Street and 2300 Crystal Drive, which is getting the lion's share of the additional density, but is a later phase project, includes another 41,000 square feet of off-site affordable housing at River House, also 60% AMI and a mixture of 2 and 3 bedroom units. The transportation elements include both the county and the applicants working together for the reconfiguration of 23rd Street, and then the LEED Silver design for the building there. And staff supports the proposed PDSP, and we'll go into some brief discussion about the 1900 Crystal Drive project and its 4 elements, plus a bonus vacation. So we'll start with the first 4 elements, which include this is, as the applicant discussed, this is the JK block in the Crystal City sector plan. This is looking west across or above National Airport, and the site is in yellow. Changing the plan view, once again, to keep you on your toes. This site specifically looks at the orange area, highlights the 421 site plan area. This is a portion of the overall super block, and The existing buildings are otherwise to remain on the block until future planning efforts specifically that will bring down Mall 4. So some of the background for the site, the original site plan 56, was approved in 1967. It was for the 4 office buildings, the 1 hotel building, and the amount of retail that's in the project, and then the large underground garage of 1,800 spaces the applicant has discussed already. A site plan that has now expired under the same number, site plan 421, was approved in 2012. This was a massive office building at just under 900,000 square feet, and at the time was very critical to supporting the office needs in the area, where this project and its shift will be help to better situate and support the residential needs that we're seeing as other office projects have advanced. And the whole area of the site would be rezoned from CO to CO Crystal City. With this, we are removing 140,000 square feet of site area from site plan 56, and that then would be the balance that creates site plan 421. There's some, it would approve the density associated and the parking associated with the remaining buildings on site plan 56, and there would be modifications for shared parking and shared loading and on parking reductions. Specifically for the principal site, site plan 421, it rezones to all Crystal City, CO Crystal City. There's a roughly 5.9 FAR project proposed, which includes just over 800,000 square feet of density. And I don't think the applicant even said this. It's 811 units in the 2 residential towers. Those are 26 and 27-story towers on the site. And I think one of the most substantial changes with this project from the approved project is the inclusion of these new connections. The project really has transformed particularly the 12th Street and the 18th Street frontages compared to what was previously proposed, and allowed the parking and loading all to be internalized off of the new north-south alley. They've also really put a human nature in the alley with adding retail on both sides of the project. And so I used a term that is not, I don't think, in our MTP anywhere. It is an alley. It will function as an alley. It also will be a pedestrian and human space. And so all of this coming together is going to be a bit of a mess. It's not going to be like every other street in Arlington, but it will be a vibrant, it has the potential to be a vibrant urban space where a lot of activities and a lot of people can mix. With that said, we really do support the alley, the north-south alley, for its vehicular nature, but the new east-west connection, the applicant and staff have a differing perspective on that. We see this as an excellent element for pedestrian connectivity. We disagree on its importance for vehicular connectivity. We feel that the inclusion of the alley and the surrounding surface streets can support the vehicular demands, where this connects to a large civic park element. We think this is an opportunity to have more space for people rather than cars on the east-west connection, and recommend it to be to have vehicle access prohibited as part of the approval. The project includes ground level retail, as we've talked about. That's just about 40,000 square feet in the 2 towers. And as the applicant discussed, 289 residential parking spaces below grade for a ratio of 0.36 units, with up to 350 spaces shared in Site Plan 56. There are a number of modifications associated with the project, specifically including additional density for lead silver, the reduced parking ratio, a reduction in the number of loading spaces, increased compact parking ratio, and density exclusions from mechanical space. Some reference image from the Crystal City sector plan. The left-hand image shows the diagrammatic vision for this area with the large center park, particularly with the removal of Mall 4 through here, and then the large office building on a podium along Crystal Drive, where this project brings the alley at grade roughly with the east-west connection and provides 2 residential towers in this area, breaking up the overall superblock. The applicant's picture was much better than mine. And so I'm just going to walk around the site and give some basic facts for us here. 20th Street here is proposed to have a 21-foot minimum sidewalk streetscape width with a minimum 10-foot clear. One of the elements that we found is that while this section deviates from the Crystal City sector plan, we believe that the transportation can be supported through it. But what we did here was we kept the curb location in a place where, should in the future 4 lanes of vehicle way be needed for whatever reason, that curb would not have to be moved. And that provided a unique opportunity for us to site larger commercial parking space along this edge to support larger vehicles that may not be able to situate in the lanes on Crystal Drive. So that's a unique element, and I think an element that will help support the ever-increasing amount of curb space that is being demanded for drop-off, loading, and also UPS-type delivery. While the alley should support all of the alley and the loading inside of these 2 buildings and inside of the mall garage should support these uses, we continue to see a high demand for that outside of this site plan. Along Crystal Drive, the sidewalk is a minimum of 16 feet 8 inches with an 8-foot clear sidewalk. One of the things that we've tried to do with this project through the SPRC process was to there was a lot of space dedicated to the tree pits and the tree pit area. We wanted to push that back into the sidewalk realm so that pedestrians would have that space. That is principally seen along the southern building with a more uniform sidewalk width along the northern building. And then on 20th Street, on 18th Street, another 16.8 sidewalk through there. The applicants talked about the dimensions for both the east-west connection and the alley, north-south alley. The project is achieving, particularly the project and the PDSP, achieve the goals of the Crystal City sector plan. And now into some of the issues and more specific discussions. And this is an element of discussion that blurs the line between the applicant's responsibilities and the county's responsibilities. So I think that we had a really substantial discussion throughout the SPRC process. And what I can bring forward today to you is that the county is really, we should have to say this, but we are dedicated to achieving the goals of the Master Transportation Plan. In this area, 2 of the goals of the recently adopted bike element are to improve the bike network along 18th and Crystal Drive. Specifically along Crystal Drive, the plan identifies a 1.5-mile connection from Alexandria through to Long Bridge Park that can support all ages and all comfort levels of riders. And so that, when you look at the NACTO guidelines, would suggest protected or buffered bike lanes along Crystal Drive. And so what we've been able to do is, outside of a specific project, Dennis has dedicated substantial staffing resources to looking at a comprehensive protected bike network throughout Crystal City. And that's not just on Crystal Drive or 18th Street, but creating a network of protected lanes that supports the entire area east of Route 1, including north-south connection and east-west connection, so it is a complete network of protected facilities. And so that is advancing outside of the site plan process. We have advanced that substantially internally, but as you know, when we look at these protected facilities, particularly in constrained right-of-ways like Crystal City has, there's a lot of trade-offs that have to be looked at and considered. Staff has a very good idea of some recommended cross-sections, but now we have to go through and look at where the deficiencies and conflicts are with that before we can really bring it out to the public. And it's critical to not bring something like that sort of half-baked out so that you don't have it, you lose support because you haven't thought about other constituencies. So we are advancing that. I think that Dennis is going to come forward with staffing to talk about that in the future, but it is going to be outside of the site plan process. And it's, I think we've got 2 engineers looking at the area, bringing it all together. And one of the other elements that we are really looking at is how to deliver different segments of all of this, whether it's concurrent with the rebuild associated with site plans or individual county efforts. And so one of the things that we're really excited about JBG's involvement in this is that specifically for 1900, they're committing to work with staff after approval to integrate the recommendations of that work that goes through a public process by DES to get those protected facilities throughout Crystal City. And so if a curb extension needs to be removed and replaced so that you have a continuous buffered bike lane, that might be a design tweak that we see different from what you see in the plans today. We are recommending that we think that the introduction of the east-west connection is detrimental to the bike network in this regard, and that's one of the reasons why we think that keeping it as a pedestrian space is a better outcome for the community and the multimodal transportation network. Let me go on to, and so what's really important to understand, we just approved the MTP. When we look at the primary bicycle corridors network map and the guidance there, this is some of the specific guidance to achieve better bicycle facilities within our corridors would be difficult, and this site and this area is no exception to that. Strategies to do so may include establishing parallel bicycle facilities on adjacent streets, reserving land for new on and off street facilities whenever redevelopment occurs, targeting reallocation of roadway space on street or shared use off-street bicycle path, bicycle ways. A mix of strategies will likely be required to improve many and may require several decades to implementation to achieve the desired results. Fortunately, this is not going to be several decades. This is getting immediate staffing resources to bring this along concurrent with the redevelopment of Crystal City. That doesn't mean that in decades we won't have better bicycle facilities than what we're talking about today, but I think that what we're talking about at staff levels and what we're hearing from the community is achieving the next level of bicycle facilities in the near future. And so what we really hope is that you'll be able to support us in that that effort as we move on to the next stages. And so county staff and the community are really being proactive to identify these opportunities, and this is one of those. The applicant talked about the optional design for protected bikeways along 18th Street. It's a little bit more graphic cross-section of how that could be delivered with a 3-lane section and protected buffered bike lanes east and west on 18th. Now, Crystal Drive is really tricky. Crystal Drive is identified as a 59-foot curb-to-curb section in the sector plan. It's largely a 59-foot section today. The redevelopment of Crystal City did not plan a large increase in the curb-to-curb width there. And as we look at what's north and south of this site and trying to make this a network of bike lanes and not just a bike lane in front of 1900 Crystal Drive, we have to keep that in mind. And so one thing that has happened since the Crystal City plan was adopted was actually two things. With the removal of the streetcar facilities provided an opportunity to provide a northbound on-street bike lane that was not otherwise in the Crystal City plan. So the section that you see as proposed is effectively the existing section. And we all know that the challenge is that this section, particularly along the southbound bike lane, experience regularly for cyclists and the safety issues that pose. And so we know generally that we want to see a protected buffer bike lane along Crystal Drive, and that would be a 5-foot protected lane adjacent to the curb with a 3-foot buffer and then parking between the travel vehicles and the buffer area. That's going to make us come to talk about some trade-offs. And I put parking in there. It may seem like a certainty. That is not a certainty, but it's one of the things, along with how the transit way and the northbound bike lane, how those work, and why it's so important that this discussion about providing a protected bike network within Crystal City has to have public engagement because of the stakeholders who are impacted across the multimodal spectrum. And so we're continuing to do that, and we'll bring more information forward to you and the public as Dennis's teams advance the project. Back to the east-west connection, one thing that I find interesting about a lot of the applicants' materials is that there's very few cars in this space when they show it. There are very few cars in the spaces that they use as reference images. We simply think that the space serves both the site users and the public better without those cars, and recommend that you recommend to the board that it be a car-free area. Now, it can be designed that cars could enter it if you wanted to have a market there, for instance, and bring a vehicle into the space. We could have mountable curbs, things like that on the irregular basis, vehicles could enter, but not the regular basis. And regularly, it would be dedicated to people. The last element that we'll talk about very briefly is vacation of the easement for public sidewalk and utilities. This is necessary because of where some of the building lines are, and it's a relatively small area. This red area shows what we're going to be vacating. What is not shown here but is in the plans is the number of additional sidewalk and utilities easements that the applicant will be granting, along with the fee dedication of portions of 18th and 20th, and I think even a small portion of Crystal Drive. So our recommendations as we move through the 6 elements to adopt the attached, or for you to recommend to the board to adopt the attached ordinance for phase development site plan, to adopt the attached ordinance for the rezoning, recommended the board to adopt the attached resolution to amend the Crystal City block plan, and then even smaller print and more words, adopt the attached amendment to site plan 56, adopt the attached site plan 421 and the associated conditions. You will note that condition 59 as presented to you is a requirement to remove the vehicle access from the east-west connection. And then also for you to recommend to the board to enact the attached ordinance of vacations. Thank you for your patience and look forward to your discussion. Oops.
Thank you. Mr. Best, do we have any speakers on this item?
We do. We have one speaker, Jillian Burgess.
Hello, my name is Jillian Burgess. I chair the Bicycle Advisory Committee, and I have to admit there's a lot of new information, a lot of new good information that I just heard tonight. So I'm amending a little bit and speaking on the fly a little bit. Crystal Drive the Crystal Drive bike lanes are blocked so often that they've become the test case for new apps and data collection that seek to quantify how often bike lanes are blocked. Crystal Drive is a vibrant urban area already with lots of people who drive, who bike, who walk, who take transit, who are on scooters, who are out and about getting to where they need to be. And right now, the street doesn't work for everyone. We're in a situation where with 3 site plans coming up, we have a very rare opportunity to make some significant changes to take this street that doesn't work for everyone and improve it, make significant improvements. So just to rewind a little bit on what we talk about a lot in the BAC, and the reason the BAC has been meeting multiple times a year with the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. These bike facilities that we're talking about are not only there to serve people who are on bikes and who are on scooters. When you have adequate or good bike facilities, what you do is you encourage people not only to bike more, but you encourage people who are on bikes and who are on scooters to bike in places that allow the rest of the transportation network to work better. So when you have something like Crystal Drive, which is kind of a scary street to bike on, to be frank, people on bikes, strong bikers, bike in the bike lane, which is often blocked, and pull out in the travel lane. When they pull out on the travel lane, often that surprises people who are driving because they thought the biker would be in the bike lane. It also slows down transit, which is not something we want to do. People who are more scared of that situation, who are on bikes and scooters, opt not to be in the bike lane, and they bike and scoot on the sidewalk, making the experience worse for people who are walking and for people who have mobility challenges. So these separated bike facilities, when we give people a safe and comfortable place to bike and scoot, what we do is we improve the transportation network for everyone. So it's great to hear that county staff is saying that we should have a plan to give a safe place for people to bike and scoot in this region. I hope as we look forward, we've had some discussion about this at the BAC, and at one point there was a thought that there might be one direction would be on Crystal Drive and another direction would be off Crystal Drive. We should think about the reality that if you can't, for example, bike southbound safely in the street on Crystal Drive, that will just push people again onto the sidewalk. So as we think about the plans, I think there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen. Definitely endorse the fact that that conversation is moving forward, but we shouldn't lose the opportunity of these redevelopments to fund it. Buffered bike lanes aren't enough. We really do need that protection to have an all ages and abilities bike lane. We've tried having parking and no physical protection between the bike lane, and it's often blocked by cars, sometimes by cars that our own government owns. On 18th Street, the protected bike lanes are very important. That's a metro stop, that should be obvious. And then finally, well, so on the bike parking, I thought it very encouraging what was said about bike parking provided to residents. I hope you will ask whether there will be parking for larger bikes, for cargo bikes, and whether there'll be facilities for charging electric bikes and electric scooters. And I hope you will ask about bike parking for visitors. And then finally, we're talking here about all ages and abilities. I'm going a little outside my scope here and talking as a mom. Shared streets for someone with small children are terrifying. When there's no actual separation to stop your 3-year-old from running in front of a car, even just that drop in a curb, it's very hard to teach children to how to be safe in that situation, and it's almost impossible to trust drivers to see children. So as you think about the shared street, as you think about that alleyway with no actual separation, no curb, I hope you'll keep in mind the fact that we do look for all ages and abilities. And that's all. Thank you very much for your time and your service.
Thank you, Ms. Burgess. All right, down to deliberation with the commission. I just wanted to speak real quickly as I was the site plan review committee representative for this process, though Commissioner Buck was there often as a member of the public, since a lot of this SPRC happened before he was appointed to the commission. So we had a lot of discussion about the protected bike lanes. That was a big source of discussion. We also had a lot of discussion about the east-west connector. So I think that's why we're hearing so much during staff and the applicant's presentation about both of those. So I'm really heartened to hear that there is an internal staff process moving forward, looking holistically at all of Crystal City east of Route 1 for an interconnected protected bike lane network. That's fantastic to hear. So just setting the stage like that, I'm happy to just move on to commission questions and conversation. Who wants to kick things off? Commissioner Wadsworth.
Hi, yeah, I'm the Transportation Commission designee to the Crystal City Citizens Review Council, and our chairman, Chrysler Al, wanted to come and give a statement tonight, but couldn't make it. So he's going to be submitting some formal comments in writing, but asked me to just relate that the commission, the Citizens Review Commission, which represents Aurora Hills, Arlington Ridge, Crystal City, Pentagon City, all of the affected neighborhoods there, would like there to be a more holistic look at the street. They don't want to this to be a question about inches of sidewalks, but as as Ms. Burgess was mentioning, a full look at the street and the overall design, rather than one project at a time. So there'll be more formal comments coming, but he asked me to relay that. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Wadsworth. Who's up next? Commissioner Clement.
Yeah, well, I support this endeavor. Without getting too much into the weeds, because I don't live in Crystal City, but I like the plan. I like the reduction in the available parking space. I'm very pleased with the parking ratio. I think that JBG shows its actual mastery of the area in the units that it's proposing. The ratios that it's proposing. It shows a certain kind of mastery that probably comes from actually owning a lot of this turf for so many years. And I wish that JVG could share its wisdom with some of the other developers who are insisting on much higher parking ratios.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
I too concerned about the Crystal Drive, the current bike lane, which is at this point useless. We've all seen, I think, the videos of someone biking along there and not running into just 1, 2, 3. It's like every block, multiple times on a block, a car, a truck, a delivery vehicle is blocking that or totally occupying that bike lane. At this point, it's useless. We have to find a better way to do it. We have to find a way to get a cycle track in there. And I know it's going to be trade-offs. But at this point, I would get rid of one of the travel lanes in favor of protected bike lanes. It just isn't working. We might as well just tear up or erase the markings right now, because it just doesn't work. It's almost a hoax on bicycle riders to say that there's a bike lane here when, as a practical matter, there isn't. So, definitely have a full look at this, try to figure out how we can do this, and yes, look at it holistically, all of Crystal City. Crystal City lends itself to biking and scootering and using alternative methods of, the last mile type of transit. So, yeah, let's do a full look at this to see how we want to get this done right within all of Crystal City. That's pretty much, I agree with Commissioner Clement about the parking. I think it's a very good ratio, especially given that there is the fail-safe of having that huge parking garage under this entire site. That's the legacy. I do want to touch on the two streets, the east-west and the north-south streets. I also noted, as JBG obviously did, is that west of Fern Street, we already have a grid that has a 19th Street, which the east-west street would be 19th Street, presumably. We already have a grid that is of those dimensions already. So I am fully in favor of having the east-west and the north-south alignments here. I would like to see how it works with cars on the east-west corridor. If it really doesn't work, if it really ends up being a problem, even if we just have a right-in turn into that shared street, and it should be a shared street, if that doesn't work, we can always just not use it, but I'd like to at least start out trying it and seeing how it works. I understand the logic of having those lobby entrances there and having that be the pickup and drop-off point. Given that Crystal Drive is such a mess already, I'm not sure by having that one street there, which shouldn't have a lot of traffic because it's not a cut-through to anywhere, is really going to pose a problem. And I'd just as soon have it now, try it, and if it doesn't work, we can always very easily make it a pedestrian-only way. Thank you.
Commissioner Buck.
Hi. Those of you who know me, you know I have a ton to say about the bike lanes. I'm going to leave that to the side for the moment. I wanted to sort of jump on the issue of the east-west and the north-south connector. First, I wanted to say I think it's fantastic, and I thought it was fantastic from the start, that you guys took a look at the sector plan and the block plan and said, we can do better. We can improve on this. And you went a little bit rogue and you proposed this greater porosity. And as a resident of 19th Street up north, I do appreciate the tight grid up there, and trying to replicate it down here is good. Regarding the east-west connector and the big issue on the table of whether or not it is open to vehicular traffic, can I understand the developer proposal? It would be a right-in only driveway, essentially?
Yes.
So there would be some sort of, let's say, physical barrier or something on the center line of the street to prevent like a left in or even just signed?
Yes.
Okay. And per the MMTIA, I think I saw in there was something like maybe 10 cars entering there in a peak hour. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, it's this is a street that's going to be very light volume. And it's very low volume. So really what we're trying to do is capture what would be potentially pickups and drop-offs for TNCs and for the pizza guy and those sorts of things. So it's a very light volume.
Okay, so that's 10 cars is a car every 6 minutes in the peak hour. Staff, do you agree with that forecast?
I think that it is fair to say that it will be a light volume. It will not be regular traffic. The frequency of that is unknown and can be sporadic. If you have 20 people leaving for a Friday night, you might have all that happen, in a cluster. If you have that space filled with 4 or 5 parked cars waiting for somebody, or let's just say the Amazon package truck decides that that's where it lives, that's what you end up with a car, you end up with the package truck there. And so to expand on where we are as far as the testing it out philosophy, because we did consider that and we heard that there are times that I think staff would support that. One of the challenges in this case is that we think that it's going to be really, really difficult to make that case that it is ultra dangerous to change it back one way or the other. And so you're going to put the board in a very difficult position to make that decision. And then you're going to have interests such as, cafe owners or restaurant owners that are going to be there that that know the space as a car space. And I mean, it's a lot easier to not start with something and then add it than it is to take something away. And so we want to prioritize the people. We don't want to add a very cumbersome and time-consuming staff effort to continue to analyze this over and over again to determine this if it starts out one way. And so we recognize that this is a low-speed area if you do interject cars there, but we think that it's better to make it for the residents and the people there.
Commissioner Calkins.
I'm happy someone brought this up because this is actually one of my main concerns. I tend to agree with staff and really think the idea of this as a pedestrian bike plaza serving the two buildings and pedestrian oriented is a more appropriate use. Even if it's 10 per hour, there will be peaks, there will be queuing, there will be likely double parking. I have the pleasure of working a couple of blocks from the wharf, which is great, except for there are very few cars that do use that circle on the wharf, but when they come, they surprise you, they scare you, they make you uncomfortable, they don't know how to act. And I know that we're hoping that drivers get better in the long term, but I don't think we want to orient TNC pickup drop-off, Amazon deliveries to what we're hoping is a very urbanized, pedestrian-oriented plaza. I also worry about the curb cut, especially if we're trying to promote a protected bike lane on Crystal City Drive, and just introducing one more curb cut, especially because drivers will have to also be looking behind them to see if as they're slowing down, there's a bike coming. It introduces more conflicts that make me uncomfortable. I think the alleyway that we're creating is a very good opportunity to reorient those pickup drop-offs to, and is where people might expect them to be happening anyway in an alley perspective.
Anybody else want to jump in on the east-west alley question while we're talking about it? I feel like people are moving, but nobody's raising their hand.
Okay.
Commissioner Gross?
I am going to be counter to my Commissioner Calkins. I actually think even though there's a concern of making rights into that lane, I think it provides some opportunity to take traffic off that part of the road. And I understand the staff's position. It's hard to take something away that you've given. But it just strikes me, this is, again, a low threshold that you can allow some transportation vehicles to go in a different direction and would alleviate some of the confusion on the drive.
Commissioner Lantalmi.
One thing I did forget to raise on the east-west in favor of it is that given that this is the entrances to the two apartment buildings, it will make handicap pickup way easier. Someone who's in a wheelchair, who has other mobility issues, having to go down the half block and around the corner to get picked up, that adds to it. I think by allowing vehicles on the east-west, the 19th Street, it will make it easier for handicap residents.
Commissioner Raddick.
Without talking in the abstract here, if this east-west connector were to be closed and there would be no car access, what would the drop-off be? A mutual drop-off for the two buildings where that east-west connector would have come out onto Crystal Drive? Is that, or what would the alternative look like, basically?
So we would pick up some space along Crystal Drive that wouldn't be associated with the curb cut, and it just like all of our curb space, we would be managing it either as pick up and drop off or as on-street parking, and making those decisions and determinations over time, changing them to support the highest and best uses. And in some regards, in a neighborhood like this, the decision to go from on-street parking that supports one car for 2 hours or so versus a zone that can a couple spaces that can support 20 or 30 TNC drop-offs. Those are the decisions that we're going to have to be making, and it's going to be made regardless of where the entrance is. And so one of the challenges with this site is they did decide to put their entrances in the middle of the building. and I can't change that. And so it's sort of a design decision that is leading to a challenge that we have there. But I do also want to note that the east-west connect, or the east-west, or the north-south connector, it is actually closer to go into the alley and pick up and drop off and get to the entrances from those locations than it would be from Crystal Drive. So I think that most likely once the TNCs start to drop that little electric pin that pushes people to go to places, is going to push them to the alley as the building starts to see operation and starts to function.
Commissioner Calkins.
I had a follow-up question. There's a very large parking garage under this building, and it has access, and a lot of TNC pickup drop-off now is starting to be facilitated to even off-site locations or underground locations. I appreciate your concern about accessibility, but I also wonder, in the ever-evolving pickup drop-off world that we're living in, where new methods and more effective methods are happening, if it would make sense just to identify a space in the garage, not have that happen at the pedestrian level, not have it happen where it could be raining, but to really think about how to maybe reappropriate 20 spaces or even 5 spaces into designated TNC pickup drop-off. The technology is going to be there. It's happening at airports. It's happening in large venues where they're starting to designate TNC spaces in accessible garages. And I think that's an opportunity, and it brings it off the plaza, and you remove your pedestrian-oriented flow conflict.
Commissioner Buck.
Question for anybody, either county or developer. Is there a reason why no crosswalks have been proposed at the 18th Street or Crystal City intersections with either of these new alleys?
So we would envision that the existing mid-block crossing that crosses 20th Street would continue. I think 18th Street, we're gonna try to see how that works, as particularly as the new metro station entrance is at the corner. We're not quite sure that you want to be facilitating the mid-block crossing there. It's also pretty close to where their garage entry is. That's a relatively easy thing for us to fix in the future and even update as part of the plans. And then this was not at one of the locations as particularly the mid-block area where we envisioned crossing at Crystal Drive. That could change, but we would much rather push them to existing signalized crossings at the major streets.
All right, let's jump into a little bit of bike lane conversation. So the staff report here, in addition to the alternative 18th Street cross-section that the applicant shown, there's also one shown from staff in the staff report. But it says, this utilization of the right-of-way would need further study and public input outside of the site plan process to implement. Can you talk about why staff feels that implementing the alternative protected bike lane cross-section on 18th would require additional public input and additional traffic, and what kind of traffic analysis would be required?
So I think that the effort that staff is implementing largely would cover that type of discussion. One of the reasons why we see this is it helps for us as staff to be able to look at our plans and say something is consistent or not consistent. This is an area that is not consistent with the plan. It is taking away and reallocating something that previously was said to be there. I don't know that this is going to be a difficult process that's identified in there, but I do think that that's consistent with our commitment to our community.
Okay. Similarly, the 20th Street cross-section that is in this plan, is it also a deviation from the sector plan? But the staff report here says staff has analyzed the proposed section considering the impacts of the proposed project and other development envisioned in the sector plan. Staff has determined the proposed section can support planned growth in the area with the proposed street width from Crystal Drive west of the site's driveway for the new south alley. Can you talk about why staff is able to analyze and become comfortable with this deviation on 20th Street, and that doesn't require additional public input, but the deviation on 18th Street requires additional impact analysis and public engagement.
And so I think one of the things that we do in site plans is that we ascribe the developer's proposal for the utilization of the street as if that's their choice. That is the responsibility of DES and the county government. And so what we really are doing in the site plan process is we're establishing the curb-to-curb width. We're not necessarily prescribing for the life of everything that curb-to-curb width would be striped or utilized in one particular way. And so the difference really between what we did on 18th Street and on 20th Street was that we really looked at this mainly from a curb-to-curb width in this site plan discussion process and in the analysis that staff has done here. And on 18th Street, what we looked at was, can you physically achieve the goals of the sector plan? Is it likely to get achieved? And what are some of the trade-offs? And so if that cross-section, because development, particularly to the south of this block, has fixed the edge of the street there, in order to achieve the cross-section for cars that is identified in the sector plan, you would have to really carve out space into this block. And while that might not be a huge problem to take space out of the development, at least from my perspective, I'm sure it would be for the applicant on the other side of the table. But we also saw it as it has second-order impacts, particularly when you look at the public open space that is identified to the west of these sites with Central Park. So as you start to allocate more and more space for cars in the width of 20th, you start to eat into that future space. And so what we did was we made sure that you could achieve four car lanes if that was ever needed. We don't recommend that be utilized for four travel lanes in this case. And then we held to the sector plan's recommendations for the sidewalk width that's being delivered in the project. And I can see the cognitive distance that you're identifying between the two. But I think that we didn't have a bike facility and we didn't have the additional right-of-way that was being taken or needed to support the bike facilities that are envisioned on 18th Street now.
Okay, I think I followed that. Commissioner Buck, do you want to jump in here?
I'm not sure I follow it. So I understand we're trying to get to a target for curb to curb on 18th Street. This is a pretty simple operational change that would need to be made to fit a bicycle facility, either by the developer's interim configuration that they've proposed or within the full build-out scenario. That is a pretty simple analysis that I'm pretty sure they can do pretty quickly. And we have an SPRC process that is intended to engage the community in questions associated with site design. And we have a controlling plan that asks us to look at these things. That's the bike element of the master transportation plan. We even have the livability framework for the 22202 zip code that asks us to consider protected bike lanes. I'm just unclear why we are leaving this particular question that anybody looks at the traffic numbers for 18th Street. I'm looking at them now, and there's 370 vehicles in the morning approaching Crystal in the very peak of the peak movement, and 344 approaching Bell. There's simply no question that in the build scenario it's going to function. Why are we dancing around the solution and not requiring it?
We're not requiring it specifically because the site plans, and first of all, the SPRC process, it is a site plan review process. It is not a public facility review process. It is not a street review process. It is specifically about the applicant's proposed thing that they pay money to go through a process to be heard. And so we are compartmentalizing the roles and the responsibilities of the county and the county's management of our street, which we fully accept, and the roles and the responsibilities the county board puts on the development through the implementation of site plan conditions. And so I think that our staff looks at the same numbers and can generally come to the same conclusion, but also I'm not saying that this is where staff is, but there could be a decision to make it, one travel lane, one way on 18th and a different type of bike facility than we're seeing here. And we're leaving all of that options open for the county and and our public process to determine. We do believe that this can be implemented. It's not precluding the implementation of this. It's just making sure that the responsibilities of the county are the responsibilities of the county and the responsibilities of the developer are the responsibilities of the developer.
Anybody else? Commissioner Raddick.
I think I've followed that, but I could be wrong, so bear with me. So the cross-section, the curb-to-curb width of 20th Street and 18th Street, they're very similar. And the difference is that, if we have to put in the protected bike lane on 18th Street, to do that, you would have to get rid of parking. And we can't do that without further public process. But we are here as the public process, and also we've got the livability framework from 22202 that Commissioner Buck cited. We have the master plan element with the bike element to the master plan. I don't really know what more would need to be said apart from the county board themselves saying that this needs to happen coming from them. Because I think the concern for commissioners, and we heard it from Commissioner Burgess from the bike advocacy earlier. It's a bike advisory committee earlier. My apologies. Is not so much that we need more time to figure out what bike facilities are proper. It's that we have a pot of money available, basically, effectively right now from the developer for large sections to do these streets, to do these bike lanes now, 18th Street, Crystal Drive, all of those. And even though there will be gaps in that project because there's not all streets on but their site plans for this, we'll have to get in the queue later to get the rest of those sections done through the CIP process or another site plan. But I don't see, if we let the great get in the way of the good, in other words, and wait till some future time to get these bike plans done properly, we might be talking a decade from now. And so that's all I have to say.
Switching gears onto Crystal Drive, I 100% am thrilled to hear that staff is looking comprehensively at Crystal Drive. I'm absolutely thrilled to hear that JBG is willing to kind of hold open to some extent the civil engineering for if a new cross-section comes in before construction happens. That's fantastic to hear. Though I am concerned, can the applicant speak to how quickly they are trying to move forward with this development? Do you have a timeline?
We hope to start construction actually towards the end of this month, and it'll be a 36 to 40 month construction window. So there is time. The curb will go in at
towards the end. Gotcha. That's very helpful. Thank you. I do worry that as Arlington processes are wont to drag on, that there is the possibility that we would not have a final decision on Crystal Drive ready before this window closes. Does staff feel that the proposed Crystal Drive cross-section that is in these plans, basically the kind of existing painted bike lane, wow, it's late. How does staff feel it would function in actuality if that actually does get put down in place when this project opens? Do you think a standard painted bike lane on Crystal Drive is going to work if that's what ends up getting put in because of new cross-section for Crystal Drive is not ready before construction happens.
I think that staff is asking for both your support in your communities and in your pushing of staff to do the right thing to get the right answer on Crystal Drive. And so we definitely acknowledge that there are the known problems on Crystal Drive. So I don't think that we could say that that is the desired outcome, to continue a painted bike lane there. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to legitimately consider the trade-offs that are before us.
Thank you. Commissioner Buck.
Sort of two concerns about Crystal Drive. One is this staff-led plan, which is fantastic to look more holistically at trade-offs and create a true plan that these sites can work from. It's great. My concern is after talking to the developer and trying to engage staff to try and see if there were tweaks possible to the 1770 site plan immediately to the north that is essentially going to do what is on these plans here, which is to maintain the status quo. The response was basically that site plan's locked in. In reading over the site plan ordinance, I don't really see anything in there that obligates anybody to take a fresh look at the civil plans for the public space for this project should a public process take place. And the answer is we need to move the curbs in 3 feet, or we need to move them out 3 feet in order to accommodate a future long-term Crystal Drive. How is that going to happen other than we're all in sort of broad agreement in principle here?
So staff is not, I don't think that on the table is something of a moving the curbs in to the order of magnitude of multiple feet. I think that we might be looking at 1 foot to 1.5 feet to 2 feet, maybe something that would be otherwise the banding zone on tree pits that doesn't need to occur when you pull parking out to the other side of a bike lane. You don't need the same door swing. So it's an easy thing to gain. But we aren't envisioning, we are envisioning setting where these buildings are going. We are not envisioning in this discussion a scenario where we're improving bike access at the expense of pedestrian access. And so that's, I think, part of the discussion that we're going to have going forward. I think that JBG has committed to, and I do want to make sure that everybody understands, they have the same commitment for 18th Street as they do for Crystal Drive. So if we end up with a raised median in the buffered area for buffering the bikes, that's something that we've talked about trying to get to. But then there's also, you have to recognize the county controls the streets, and if we want to do it and it is a decision by the county board to go do it and finance it, we can move that side, we can move that curb and do that.
Anybody else?
Okay. Something you said just concerned me there about how you're not anticipating moving the curbs more than, say, removing the step-out zone. You earlier said that the issue of the presence of curbside parking was definitely not a given. That 7 feet, I think, is a critical 7 feet that we really need to have in play if we're going to come up with a true long-term solution. Is 11 parking spaces on Crystal Drive more important than, say, a protected bike lane, if that's what the trade-off is that's identified? And so now I'm a little bit concerned about the scope of what the county is looking at, because I don't think we're going to get where we need to be by looking at moving curbs a foot one way or the other. And now I'm wondering, what is exactly the scope of the solutions that the county staff is looking at in doing this study?
I think that what I should say is that we're not looking at moving them in towards the building by 3 feet. The idea that you could move the curb in towards the street, that might be a different story to the extent that, that there's substantial added costs that are not equivalent to what the developers already planning on doing. I'll let them speak to that, but I think that in most parts, putting 300 feet of curb in one place, whether it's 5 inches one way or the other, it doesn't have a major cost change. So I hope that answers your question and brings some certainty to what we're looking at.
Would you also say the staff is looking at solutions where every on-street parking space on Crystal Drive is not sacrosanct and set in stone?
I would say that looking at our curb space management, curb space utilization is a critical part of those trade-offs. I do not necessarily want to put it in the mind of the community that is the outcome.
No.
And I think that's why staff has to bring forward well-thought-out documentation and discussion in a civic engagement process to have those discussions so you don't end up with, a parking versus bike fight.
Great, thank you. All right, couple things I want to say. Just want to again reiterate my appreciation for staff looking at comprehensive protected bike lane network in Crystal Drive. Appreciate looking at a holistic look at Crystal Drive. I have two main concerns. The first is that there is the possibility that we could put back into place a painted bike lane on Crystal Drive because the public process is not advanced at a sufficient rate. And I would not want to duplicate the problems that we have farther north on Crystal Drive again with this project just because the public process didn't move quickly enough. I just, 18th Street seems so clear and obvious to me that I don't understand why we would why we would be waiting on approval of that cross-section. So with that said, I'm going to make a motion, and it's kind of long, so I appreciate you bearing with me, and then we're happy to have a discussion about it. I move that the county board recommend approval of the proposed site plan amendment, phased development site plan, and associated rezonings, easement vacation, and block plan amendments with the following changes. One, that the enhanced bike facility cross-section for 18th Street South depicted on page 43 of our draft board report as Figure 29, 18th Street South alternative configuration providing protected bike lanes, be implemented as part of development and construction of either this site or the already approved development immediately to the north as appropriate. Two, that the board direct transportation planning staff to initiate a public process to determine the most appropriate long-term cross-section for the Crystal Drive / 12th Street South corridor from the intersection of 12th Street South and Longbridge Drive to the Potomac Yard Trail. This public process shall include consideration of street parking removal and other changes to the cross-section necessary to provide bike facilities that meet the requirements of the bicycle element of the master transportation plan. Three, that the outcome of the above process be a conceptual plan that shall be used to require updates to the civil engineering plans for 1900 Crystal Drive and any other approved but unbuilt site plans on the Crystal Drive 12th Street South corridor prior to construction as schedules allow. Four, that staff and the applicant develop an interim cross-section for the Crystal Drive corridor that would provide a southbound protected bike lane without removing the existing northbound bike lane along this project's Crystal Drive frontage to be constructed as part of the project in the case where the outcome of the above process is not complete in time to update the civil engineering plans for 1900 Crystal Drive prior to construction. This interim cross-section would be expected to be temporary, pending the outcome of the study, and shall be built in the interim using temporary materials such as bollards, precast curbs, planters, and other temporary materials that create physical separation from passing traffic.
I'll second.
That's seconded. So to summarize, oh, yes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm impressed with the length and breadth of that motion. I would just remind the Transportation Commission that with respect to the east-west connection, that would require an amendment to Condition 59 if there was a change to allow cars. Just want to make sure that's captured as well.
So you're saying the proposed conditions in our draft report, which this recommends that the board approve, would forbid
That's
travel
correct.
on the east-west
That's
connection?
correct. So allowing them at any point, whether that would be on a trial basis or without a trial, would require an amendment
An
to
additional
Condition
change.
59.
Thank you. That's very helpful clarification. Commissioner Buck.
I just remembered that I don't think we've discussed the 10th to 12th Street connector issue as well, and that perhaps we may want to discuss that as well.
Well, since it's raised, actually, it's not really mentioned in the motion. So we might have to, since a motion is on the table, we can only deal with the motion at hand.
I can motion separately once we complete discussion.
Who wants to talk about this motion? Let me summarize it since it's long, to be really clear. It basically says, approve the project, but build it with the protected bike lanes on 18th Street, either as part of this project or as part of the existing approved project immediately north of it, where the kind of required space is from. Do the public process, which staff has already said they are planning to do. If the public process finishes in time, update this project's public space plan to match what's in the public process, along with any other development that is not yet built along this frontage, and develop an interim plan that involves a southbound protected bike lane that could be put into place if the public process is not done prior to when it would need to be for construction of 1900. Any discussion? All right.
I'm highly in favor.
All those in favor then? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Opposed? Commissioner Boucher. Please always speak to why you vote against it.
Have a motion, thank you, person, that we just accept the site plan as it was presented with no amendments.
This amendment has already been approved.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can't do that? Is that what you're
The
saying?
time for that was during the discussion of this,
I'm sorry.
of this motion.
Excuse me, well, sorry about that.
Yeah, do you want to talk about the 10th Street connection before we wrap this agenda item then, Commissioner Buck?
Sure. I guess I have to do it in the form of a motion?
No, we can still just talk.
Okay. The connector road, I know, is a little bit of source of controversy in our neighborhood, and I hope I'm not selling any objections short by saying that there is some concern about the utility of the project, and I think particularly as it's being presented as a quote unquote public benefit. I think there's the sentiment that at least I've heard from folks is that this connector road, while it is in the master transportation plan, it is in the sector plan, it seems to serve a largely private purpose, which is improving site access to the cluster of office buildings just north of 12th Street. I myself don't have a strong feeling either way on the utility of the access road, but I do, we have been hearing, I think, a strong voice in the PDSP meeting that as a public benefit, this particular road may not quite rise to that level. So, so perhaps I will make a motion that the connector road be excluded from the list of proposed public benefits as part of the PDSP.
Is there a second for that?
Can we clarify what the connector road is?
Yeah, staff want to just talk about the connector road, and if you would be so kind, what staff considers the value of the connector road in the Greater Crystal City Transportation Network.
If you can find it, I'll speak to So this connector road is associated with a future final site plan that's going to come before you and the public. It is a new connection between basically the Long Bridge entrance right now and one of the existing office buildings. It provides a connection from 10th to 12th. It goes across a pretty steep grade as it is at that location. And I think what staff has put this into this package for is as much its broad transportation purpose as its specific, and not necessarily its specific vehicular connection. So it can serve a transportation purpose. It can become a dedicated street and have fee easement and ownership by the county. And the site plan process, while I think that staff can easily say that the street would be consistent with the sector plan as proposed, I would not say that it is precluded from being discussed as what is the value of this, and should this be removed, not included into the plan, and not as a street for cars, and then either kept or removed from the master transportation plan associated with that final site plan.
So trying to restate this back at you, you would say just because it is included as a benefit in the PDSP now does not preclude it a discussion at SPRC that might find that this transportation street connection is not the appropriate benefit for that site plan to deliver?
I would say that the vehicle connection is not the appropriate thing to deliver. I think that staff still sees the benefit in the
land,
of the land and the right of way, no matter what the circumstance be.
That said, I think we're still waiting on a second on Commissioner Buck's motion, if anybody is so inclined.
I think I'd actually like to withdraw my motion.
Okay, it's gone. Anything else before we let these fine folks go home with our approved motion?
I'd actually like to add one motion or amendment to it with, on, I think it's 59, that has the, that right now is precluding cars from the east-west connector. I would make a motion that the Transportation Commission recommends to the county board that Section 59 be modified to allow but not require vehicular traffic on the east-west connector.
Is there a second for that? Commissioner Burrow seconds it. I'd like to speak in support of this motion. I support the opportunity of putting vehicular movement on the east-west connector. Personally, I would love to see cars not there, but as with my commissioner hat on, I see the benefit, and I defer to some extent to the applicant's desires to make sure that their buildings work. They've maintained pretty strongly throughout this whole thing that they feel that it's an important piece, and I certainly would enjoy getting as much pickup and drop off of Crystal Drive as humanly possible. So I will be voting in favor of the amendment so that they could allow cars on the east-west connector as desired.
And for those reasons, that's why I offer the amendment.
Any other discussion of this amendment?
And also in support of accessibility.
Commissioner Buck, were you?
This is one where I feel kind of strongly about the presence of a need for a crosswalk here, especially if there's vehicular traffic going in and out. I feel like equal opportunity to cross and access what is going to be a pretty grand view looking to the west and up towards what's going to be a pretty hallmark of a linear park going up. And I think the fact that everybody seems to be in agreement that left turns into this driveway are not a desirable condition. I think there's an opportunity to do a possible median treatment here that not only restricts that left turn movement, but provides a pedestrian crossing refuge is an opportunity I'd love to see if indeed we are heading towards allowing vehicle access on this driveway.
Anyone else want to speak on this motion to amend? Commissioner Calkins.
I'll reiterate that I don't think pulling vehicles to this is actually that much of a transportation benefit from an access perspective. And I do think there's a lot of opportunities to do access for TNC, loading, high-level pickup drop-off in the garage. And if it hadn't been talked about before, I think that's something that I would strongly encourage, to have vehicles off the street, period, for pickup drop-off. It removes conflicts from each other as well as conflicts with pedestrians, bikes, and creates a nice plaza that people can enjoy all the time instead of having to worry about a conflict with a vehicle.
All right, all those in favor of the motion, which strikes the prohibition on allowing cars on the east-west, therefore allowing potentially cars on the east-west connector, all those in favor of that motion, raise your hand. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Opposed? That's 1, 2, 3. All right, that is amended into the motion. And I believe that's the end of this agenda item. Yes, thank you very much. The commission will take a 5-minute break while everybody gets set up for the next agenda item. Thank you.
You're gonna corrupt my file. We have about 10,000. Yeah. Should I open them? Make sure they work. Try opening them. Okay. I think they're fine. Look at that. Open. Let's have a little mishap with this computer.
It's only been once.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay, where's your intro? Your opening slide?
Few slides if needed.
You don't have a rendering?
No, I don't even think that.
It's great to put on the rendering.
Yeah, it's my thing.
You guys have a widescreen mode.
Oh, wow.
All right, Mr. Best, let's get back to it.
And our next item is item number 4. It's the Artis Senior Living Site Plan. This is a site plan action, and I'll turn it over to the applicant for a presentation.
Good evening, Nicholas Cummings here with Walsh Colucci, here on behalf of the applicant. I just have some brief background to give before we have a brief presentation from Wells & Associates, obviously recognizing the hour and the number of agenda items left that we have to work through. So this is a new site plan application and rezoning for an assisted living facility located on Lee Highway. The property is currently zoned to the R5 district, RA615 district, and the R1530T district. These are a variety of districts designed to suit very different uses, not all of which are consistent with the GLUP. The R5, for example, is primarily single-family homes, RA615 multifamily, which is in fact a little bit more dense than the planning for this area, and R1530T is really a townhome district. Our proposal is to rezone to the RA818 zoning district, consistent with the low-medium GLUP designation, so really cleaning up the zoning for the entire site as well. Briefly, we're proposing an assisted living facility consistent with the new zoning ordinance amendments that is approximately 75 feet in height, 175 units, and an FAR of approximately 1.3. Otherwise, while the project is not seeking any bonus density, and in fact none is allowed in this zoning district for this use, we are providing community benefits above and beyond the standard site plan requirements, including design, installation, and maintenance of a new corner park that was identified in the Lee Highway concept plan, meeting rooms for the civic associations, which are much needed, a green roof on the parking garage, and LEED Silver certified construction, which is an update from the SPRC. I will now turn it over to Wells, but just say this, that this has been a long road on this project with a lot of work going into it, a zoning ordinance amendment, among other things, and so we're very happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Chris Cabot with Wells & Associates. Happy to be standing at this point. This is essentially the same slide deck that we showed at the info session, so I'm going to go through some of the changes and hit the highlights. Again, this is a low trip generating use. The 183 beds would generate 34 AM peak hour trips and 47 PM peak hour trips. The intersections in the study area do operate at acceptable levels, and we'll be doing a TDM program for the employees of the site. This is an updated slide that we'll talk about the changes in a few slides here later. The next slide is the pedestrian circulation showing the sidewalks. I wanted to point out that sidewalk that was recently completed on the north side of Old Dominion. The bus stops along Lee Highway, both WMATA and ART run along Lee Highway, and one of the ART lines goes down Utah Street right there at the middle of our site. And there's also the school bus stops that we talked about last time. We could breeze through this slide here. It's just showing the bike connections in the area. There was a change with our bike racks. We added 2 bike racks along Lee Highway in that area that's bounded by the green square there, but 2 bike racks for 4 bikes, short-term use. And we also made a change in the garage at the suggestion of staff. We were suggesting 10 bike spaces in the garage, and just talking with staff and the use, we're going to provide lockers instead. We're going to provide 4 lockers for the more long-term use and security. This is one of the changes here on Lee Highway since the last time we met. We added another 2 feet to Lee Highway. We had, if you'll recall, the south side of Lee Highway from the center line did not change, but the north side, we have a 12-foot travel lane, and we had an 8-foot parking lane. We made that 10 feet now, so we took 2 more feet towards our property. And The reason for that is, again, for the future planning of a potential bike lane along Lee Highway. And the sidewalk there would stay the same as we had before. It was 6.5 feet across our frontage, and there would be the 5-foot tree panels as you go down the site. North Taylor Street did not change from last time. Again, it's a yield street today, and we'll be adding, we'll have 2 travel lanes, essentially 2 11-foot travel lanes, and we'll be adding the parking lane on our site, as well as the 6-foot sidewalk. We showed these last time, the ability of tractor trailers to maneuver on site and not on the public street, but to turn around on site. The parking ratios stayed the same as we talked about last time. There are 92 required, and we're providing 109. And then the last slide is our TDM plan. Again, this would be for the employees of the site, and as highlighted last time, that we'll be providing. I think one of the things to point out is that they would have an option of the choice of the Metro fare, the 1-year bike share membership, or the 1-year car share membership. Those are really the highlights and the changes that we made to the plan. We're here to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Appreciate your brevity.
Hi, I'm Jane Kim with DES Transportation, and I have a very brief staff presentation about the Artis Senior Living Site Plan. I think we're familiar with the location of the site, so I'll kind of go through these factual slides a little bit quickly. The existing condition is that there's 9 parcels that are going to be rezoned, and the development has 175 units in a 6-story building with a structured parking garage with 112 spaces. There are modifications associated with the site plan for setback and lot coverage. Currently, single-family houses, outbuildings, landscape, and the proposed building does take up the majority of the site. I wanted to focus a little bit on the Lee Highway frontage. The existing curb-to-curb width is 30 feet. Chris mentioned that they shifted their frontage curb line back 2 feet. That was at the request of county staff, so that we could get 35 feet of curb-to-curb width. I have a screenshot of the bicycle map, or the new map from the bicycle element of the MTP that shows this stretch of Lee Highway in the blue dotted area as a planned bike lane, and more specifically project 326, and the 3 projects are all on-street facilities, if you needed to know. So right now what we have here, the top picture is what Artis will deliver. So you see the very wide 10-foot parking lane. And the important thing here to note is that we're really preserving that 35-foot right-of-way width for future expansion of bicycle lanes along this frontage to be in line with our county adopted MTP and bicycle plan goals. This is the tentative design below, with a buffered bike lane on the side of the Artis property, and then a on-street stripe lane on the other side. Currently, there's no striped or marked parking or bicycle lanes, so this would be an improvement over what's there today. And we know that people likely are not going to be riding their bicycles along Old Dominion, and so think that this is a very important parallel stretch to provide access. Obviously, this project, which is not even a full block, is not going to deliver 3/4 of a block of a bike facility on one side of a street. So we just wanted to make sure that we were keeping that 30, trying to get as much right-of-way that we possibly could, which is also in line with the goals and policies of the new bicycle element. And I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of, what it may look like in the future. And then just some more, an overview of some of the community benefits. I think they're pretty standard. And staff's recommendation for you to adopt the rezoning as well as approve the new site plan. I'm here for any questions.
Thank you very much. I believe when this was here as an info item, some commissioners asked about the lack of crosswalks across Lee Highway through this entire stretch, especially given that there are bus stops, of course, on the far side of Lee Highway. I was just wondering if that has been looked at or if there are any changes in regard to that since this was here as an info item.
So the crosswalk here at Taylor will be maintained. We're not adding any crosswalks here. The main reason why is because we have moved the existing bus stop to this area. And so we think that the majority of the people who are crossing will be heading towards the bus stop and should do so close to it. And so we've maintained this, this crosswalk, and, with the new location of the bus stop, think that that is an adequate point to cross at Lee Highway. And I believe the next crossing is just at Thomas. So it's not a super long block, and we don't really want to encourage mid-block crossings. And so I think that the two existing crosswalks are sufficient for this project.
Any other commission questions or comments? Commissioner Lantelmi.
The neighborhood raised a number of questions about parking on the Lee Highway, in front of the building. With the revised street width, you're preserving space for the two bicycle lanes, which would eliminate all of the parking on both sides?
Yes. So if the entire corridor gets designed and built out, it would eliminate, for this project site, the parking that's currently shown on the north side of Lee Highway.
Okay, how will that then work for the entrance area of the facility where we have pickup and drop off? And apparently the fire department wants that to be the place where like the EMTs pick up people if need be?
Well, the front door on Lee Highway currently, yes, is designed for some short-term pickup and parking as well as pickup and drop-off activity. The fire department in an emergency situation is going to park their fire truck anywhere and use any door they choose to access the building, likely the front door. And that will continue regardless if there's parking there or if there's a bicycle lane there. And we've, spoken with the fire marshal, and he's comfortable with the amount of on-street parking and the gaps that are provided within the parking. They also have the entire width, again, in an emergency situation, of the highway to stage a fire truck and things of that nature. So there wasn't a very large concern about the configuration as it is. Normal, more day-to-day ambulatory transport services will be taking place within the garage. And we know that the garage has enough space for those types of vehicles to maneuver in and out. So for patient transport that's non-emergency and things of that nature, we would expect all of those activities to occur internal to the site. In the event that we remove the parking, I think there will still be the ability for an emergency vehicle to access the site. We're not proposing a parking or bicycle facility with any sort of barriers, and so that would still allow for that kind of access. Again, though, if and once that parking is removed, we'll work very closely with the applicant to, figure out if we can change some of the signage on North Taylor Street to help support their pickup and drop off activities for their patients and their families and visitors and staff and things like that. So we still have another curb frontage that we can work with that has currently, I think, 10 proposed parallel spaces that we can manage in the future. We don't know what pickup and drop-off is going to look like by the time, this bicycle facility may come in. So, at that time, we can kind of look at it all holistically, work with the needs of the applicant and trying to come up with a solution that works for their operations as well as our implementation of a bicycle facility.
So that would include TNCs and short-term deliveries, that sort of thing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, I move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the county board approve the proposed site plan 452 and associated rezonings as outlined in our draft board report dated February 28th, 2020. It's been seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? 10-0. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item is item number 5. It's the Key Bridge Marriott Site Plan and MTP amendments. This is an action item. I'll turn it over to the applicant.
All right, we'll keep this moving. I'm still Nicholas Cummings, still with Walsh Colucci, and here on behalf of another applicant. So again, brief background before Walls & Associates takes over. This is a major site plan amendment for the Key Bridge Marriott. There's no rezoning proposed with this project. We're proceeding under the existing zoning with bonus density as permitted under established county policy. We're proposing a substantial renovation and redesign of the existing hotel, reducing it to 445 units from the 592 approved units today and converting it to a high-quality modern hotel. A new 300-unit apartment building constructed over the existing parking deck on the western portion of the property. 2 new condominium buildings with a total of 151 units on the eastern portion of the property facing the Key Bridge. And recapping from our last presentation, we are particularly excited about the Esplanade facing the Potomac River with potential for a bike and pedestrian connection through NPS land, providing additional circulation through the property and really linking everybody into that wonderful new park. We've also made some important changes from the last time we were in front of you in response in part to some of the comments. We've added a capital bike share station. The 2 new streets are now shared streets, which I think Mr. Walters alluded to last time, which will significantly add to the pedestrian and cyclist experience in the site. We consolidated garage entrances on the west residential building, which had a positive ripple effect throughout that area, creating more accessible pathways. There were some great issues with having both of those entrances. Without them, everything got a bit better. We're happy about the effects with that. There's more screening and decorative elements along exposed garage walls and other, formerly blank walls or near areas like loading docks, including a living green wall on the west residential building near the Custis Trail, and historical interpretive elements on the North Nash Street facade of the west residential building as well. While not transportation related, we did commit to LEED Gold on both of the residential buildings and improved energy efficiency measures, and created a publicly accessible overlook on the west residential garage with a great view of the creek and forest. So that'll be nice. Another space where people can kind of enjoy the natural beauty of this site. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Walls & Associates, and we'll keep moving. Thanks.
Hi, good evening. I'm John Schick with Walls & Associates. Since we're back for our action here tonight, and a lot of you guys have seen this site, I'm going to move through the slideshow fairly quickly and just kind of hit on some of the highlights. So I think everyone's familiar with the site location. It's the gateway site as you come across the Key Bridge on the north side of Lee Highway, just to the west of North Fort Myer Drive, about a quarter mile from the metro station. This shows the rendering. The foreground is Gateway Park. As you can see, in the middle is the renovated hotel, and then the west residential is on the left side of the screen, then the east residential is on the right. This shows the existing site. Today it's occupied with the hotel, 582 rooms, and it's served by 3 access points, 2 along Lee Highway, and then 1 on Fort Myer. This shows the rendered site plan. The west residential building will contain 300 dwelling units. The hotel is going to come down in size to have about 445 hotel rooms, and then the east residential, about 151 dwelling units. As shown there with the access points, they're highlighted with the yellow triangles. We are closing the access on Fort Myer, so we will have 2 access points, the existing ones today, It'll be the extension of Nash Street and then the new Mead Street, which will be constructed in between the hotel and the East Residential, as well as a service drive that will provide access in between the two streets in front of the hotel and provide pickup and drop off. So an MMTA was completed. Again, it looked at 10 study intersections. The peak hours were 7:30, 8:30, and 4:45 to 5:45. It showed that all these study intersections currently operate at acceptable levels of service. Again, the existing hotel had 582 rooms. The proposed hotel comes down, and we add residential, which gives you about a net increase of 99 a.m. peak hour trips and then 104 p.m. peak hour trips. So we looked at a future build-out year of 2023. We did update the MMTA to include the Holiday Inn site. So it was resubmitted, and it also addressed a few county comments that were received. So the summary of the future results just showed that, we would have consistent levels of service to what's shown in the future without. Overall intersection about 8 seconds or less, and then traffic signal time modifications could be made to mitigate. This just highlights the transit facilities. Everyone's very familiar with the site. Again, we're just north of the Roslyn core area, the metro station. There's a bus stop along our frontage. This graphic shows the on-site vehicular circulation routes highlighted with the dark blue lines. And then it also shows the garage access points with the yellow triangles and loading with the red triangles. One thing to point out here is we are consolidating access into the west residential building, closing the access point closest to Lee Highway to have a single access point further back in the site. The blue stars represent the pickup and drop-off areas for each of the buildings. This graphic represents the inbound and outbound routes essentially from the site. So with the closure of the access point on Fort Myers Drive, you can see vehicles will now use the Nash Street extension and Mead Street access. You can make a right out and then essentially come down Nash and then traverse east on Lee Highway if you were trying to get back to the east. This graphic outlines the PED circulation as well as the primary bike routes. The yellow line shows the Custis Trail that comes down in front of the site. The purple shows the plethora of pedestrian routes that are available in the vicinity. One thing to note along the back side, we will be providing a bike facility along the Esplanade that will be separate from the pedestrian routes, which I'll show in the next slide a little closer. So here you can see how we're going to have a separate bike trail as well as a pedestrian route along the back side of the hotel around the Esplanade that will connect over to Nash Street. It'll be marked with different pavement types, whereas the pavement type that denotes the pedestrians will be similar throughout the entire site with the pavers, and then there will be a permeable surface that will be used for the bike routes. And we're still exploring ideas with pavement markings and signage to help delineate each of the paths. This graphic just shows the bicycle facilities that are available in the area. We're just north of the Roslyn Metro. We are adding a Capital Bike Share station at the corner of Fort Myers Drive and Lee Highway, so that's a major improvement with the site. So there'll be one as soon as you enter into Arlington now. This slide summarizes the parking. The east and west residentials will have about 408 spaces, which equates to a 0.9 parking ratio. If you break it out individually, the west building, being rental, would be at about 0.66, which is lower than what was previously shown. And then the east residential, being the condo for sale units, is parked at a 1.39, and the hotel would be parked at about a 0.48 with the renovation. And then the bicycle parking on the right side of the screen just essentially shows that we will comply with both Class 1 and Class 3 requirements. This slide shows an overview of the TDM program that will be put in place. A few things to highlight are in the facilities portion. We'll have bicycle parking on site, streetscape improvements along Lee Highway and Fort Myers Drive, the removal of the pedestrian bridge across Lee Highway consistent with the sector plan. And then we're also removing the site driveway, so reducing the number of conflict points for the Custis Trail, in addition to installing the Capital Bike Share Station, the southeast corner of the site. These are just a few shots from around the site. This essentially shows where we're taking down the ped bridge, and we're going to have the service drive in front of the hotel. It will facilitate two-way travel. It will have some short-term parking along it, and there'll be a 16-foot trail plus the buffer, which was recently improved with the Custis Trail improvements. This shows what's out there today. I think everyone's familiar with. Shows what it will go to in the future with the removal of the ped bridge. I mean, it will open the site up a lot more to Roslyn and kind of integrate it with the rest of Roslyn, hopefully a lot better. This shows a cross-section of Nash Street. It's supposed to be an active street for all uses, a shared street. So as you can see, the travel lanes are flush with the sidewalks. So there'll be two 11.5-foot travel lanes and then wide zones for pedestrians. There'll also be some short-term parking along there, as well as facilitate residential drop-off and pickup for the west residential building. And then shown there is the access point to the garage, where will be 3 lanes with the middle one being reversible. This shows Mead Street. Again, this is between the east residential and the hotel. The yellow outlines the hotel and restaurant short-term parking that's proposed, as well as the drop-off zone is located there for the east residential building, as well as the garage and the loading access points for the east residential building towards the rear. At this point, we'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Evening, I'm Dennis Sellen, DES staff, with a brief staff presentation along with recommended actions on the project, which, as John indicated, you have seen this as an action or as an information item in January. The existing 5.5 acre site is currently developed with a 12-story hotel, 592 guest rooms, meeting and banquet space, and parking. The amendment to Site Plan 53 to redevelop the site will partially demolish and renovate the existing 12-story hotel to accommodate 445 hotel units, meeting rooms, banquet space, construct 1 new 16-story 300-unit west residential building, 2 16-story east residential buildings with a total of 151 units, 623 total parking spaces for all uses, along with parking density and other modifications, which are described in the full report. The GLUP and zoning, which are not being modified. It is high-medium residential in the GLUP, 3.24 FAR, and CO 2.5 FAR zoning. And again, that is not being modified. You will probably note that this site was deliberately excluded from the Roslyn Sector Plan, which was adopted in 2015. However, there are 2 items of note with respect to this site, specifically the pedestrian bridge across Lee Highway was recommended to be removed, and that is policy P5, which states that removing the existing concrete ramps and skywalks will provide greater access and views between the park and central Roslyn. Additionally, the study of this area, which is known as the Northern Gateway area, was recommended for further study, a study of the Northern Gateway area to establish a comprehensive vision for the area is recommended, which would address the relationships among the Esplanade, the Potomac River, desired river access, the proposed boathouse, improvements to the Mount Vernon Trail and the Custis Trail, Gateway Park planning, potential air rights development over I-66, potential park and open space opportunities, potential memorial and monument development at Roslyn Circle, and Key Bridge pedestrian and bicycle improvements are recommended, and that is on page 88 and 89 of the sector plan. As you know, that study has not commenced. However, there were 2 long-range planning meetings that were held prior to the commencement of the site plan review process for the project, which I'll talk about very briefly later on in the presentation. Generally supportive of MTP policies, particularly are the bicycle and pedestrian facilities, which this project will deliver. It will implement the furthest north of the core of Roslyn recommendations, which is the pedestrian facilities along Fort Myer Drive, which will complete the project all the way to the Key Bridge, as well as new on-street and off-street bicycle facilities. As the applicant indicated, there will be a new a 15-dock capital bike share station provided, as well as appropriate bicycle support facilities such as interior parking lockers and visitor parking. The pedestrian facilities, which include the removal of the sky bridges and the related structures, widened sidewalks along Fort Myer Drive, as well as the removal of the turn pocket and the driveway entrance on North Fort Myer Drive. The applicant has mentioned that there are parking modifications to the site, both for the hotel and the residential. We believe that these are justified given the access to the multimodal facilities, metro, and other transit, proximity to both to central Roslyn as well as to Georgetown. And these ratios are not unusually seen in these types of projects. Transportation issues, we have really not identified many. This one has come up, that there are potential for conflicts at the site entrances at the Custis Trail. However, should that continue to be an issue, there are actions that the county may take post-approval. I think this is a site that we will monitor. We have reviewed 6 years of crash data at both of these entrances, actually at all of the entrances, and have not observed any no crashes that have involved bicycles or pedestrians. Not just to say that there are not unreported ones, but we do not see anything additionally that the applicant could do in this case. In terms of public engagement, there were 2 long-range planning committee meetings that were held in September and October. The site plan review committee held 3 meetings between November 2019 and January 30th of this year. Additionally, multiple committees and commissions have reviewed the project. Support has been given as indicated, and there are, in addition to this commission, I beg your pardon, the Housing Commission and the Planning Commission will both review this next week. And this is scheduled to be heard at the County Board March meeting on Saturday, March 21st. We have heard from no civic associations or other community groups with respect to their opinions on this project. additional actions. There are associated street vacations with respect to the project's two portions of an easement for public street and utilities recorded in 1972, totaling approximately 2,800 square feet. These are necessary to construct the underground garage as well as above-grade portions of the east residential buildings. These are not currently utilized for public street and utility purposes. The applicant will compensate the county for the fair market value of the portions of the easement. And this is a image of that. Betsy Herbst from our real estate division is here for the vacations. I see that Rich Viola is here for the MTP amendment. And we can show his slides on that. And before we do that, I am just going to show you the slide on the recommended actions for all of the actions that we're recommending for the board to take. Staff and county manager will recommend that the board adopt the ordinance to renovate the existing hotel with approximately 445 hotel units, construct 3 new residential buildings containing a total of approximately 451 residential units with modifications of use regulations to include the required parking, increased density, other modifications as necessary to achieve the proposed development plan located at 1401 Lee Highway, subject to the conditions of the ordinance. Second, to adopt the attached resolution amending the master transportation plan to add new sections of North Nash Street and North Mead Street to the subject property. And thirdly, to find that the proposed vacations are substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan or applicable portion thereof, including the master transportation plan. That concludes my presentation. I will now, Rich Viola from our Transportation Planning Bureau will now give a brief presentation on the master transportation plan amendment that accompanies this site plan amendment.
Great. Good evening. My name is Rich Viola with Arlington Transportation Planning. I'm going to give you a very quick presentation tonight. So there are 2 streets that are identified as coming to be developed along with this project. And if I could get the clicker here. So I don't think you need to hear a whole lot about the background, as Mr. Selden has just gone through much of that. But there are these 2 sections of new streets that are to be added with the site plan development. And we have identified them based upon the county's naming kind of protocol. North Nash Street, the one on the west, which would connect with North Nash Street south of Lee Highway, and then the one on the east is, we've identified it as North Mead Street. We did come to this commission a few weeks ago, and we did the request to advertise. It was approved. There was identification of perhaps changing one of those names from Mead to Mill Street. Staff kind of considered it's a reasonable name for a new street. There is sort of the issue, though, of creating a kind of a proliferation of street names in a particular area where we have proposed Mead Street. Otherwise, everything is kind of moving ahead with this project. So we would be going after tonight's meeting. We'll be going to the Planning Commission next week, along with the site plan proposal, and to the county board later this month for approval. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thanks.
All right, thank you both. Are there any commission questions on this? Commissioner Clement.
Okay, so this is a point of information. I was reading the TIA that accompanied this site plan today, and I just want to quote a small amount of text here. It says the pipeline development trips were assigned to roadway network using distributions provided in other traffic studies. The total pipeline development trips, that is other projects in the pipeline, in the immediate vicinity, are shown in Figure 5.2, and et cetera. And they amount to 1,500 AM peak hour trips, 1,900 PM peak hour trips, and 21,500 daily trips. That's a huge amount of pipeline traffic, excluding both this development and 3 other developments, and 2 of which are mentioned here. It says it is noted there are additional approved developments in Roslyn, including Roslyn Plaza and Roslyn Gateway, but were not included in this study. Also not included is the Ames project, which is going to be presented as an information item tonight. So basically, this commission is being asked to make a decision about the transportation impact of this project, absent information on approximately half the pipeline development projects. Now, this is another case of asking the transportation to make a decision without adequate information. It is reasonable to assume, based on the numbers that I have just quoted, that that the traffic congestion caused by this project is going to be a real showstopper. This is going to the intersection of Lee Highway and Fort Myer Drive is already operating at LOSF. And anybody who traverses that area knows that it's extremely congested now. And we are basically going to be doubling the density of this particular site, all without adequate information about pipeline development. Now, I think that's a disgrace. I hate to say that, because the project itself, that is the design, is very appealing. And matter of fact, I would like to say the design of this particular site is sexy, but the traffic nightmare that accompanies it is not going to be fun for anybody, including the residents. So I really am unhappy that a more comprehensive transportation analysis was not performed. Thank you.
Other commission questions or comments? Commissioner Buck.
Just 3 items that I know this commission had issues with when this came to us as an info item, and I correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not seeing any remediating measures taken. One is this loop driveway. I know we all kind of had a little bit of heartburn with how that loop drop-off element is going to operate. There was a request to look at something more resembling a traditional curb cut arrangement. 2 is just the sheer amount of parking. My memory is faulty, but this seems high, and it doesn't seem radically different from what I recall from the info item. And I think I'd echo Commissioner Clement's concerns about trip generation and how I would go further and tie that to just the sheer amount of parking and vehicle generation that infers. And the third is this East Residential building. There was a sort of a TBD answer we were given with regard to this sort of 2-story inter-building podium and the lack of connectivity, how it breaks up the sort of the nice terrace park that you've designed along Fort Myer Drive and the Mead Street connection. And it's late, so I'm not reading plans very well, but it looks like that podium structure is still in place. Is that the case?
Yes.
Commissioner Lantalmy.
First question is, has there been a resolution yet to the connection of the bike trail, the Esplanade to Key Bridge over the Park Service property, or is that still up in the air?
It's in the same place it was, in that we have to get permission from the federal government to be able to do the connection. And so there's site plan conditions built in that we're drafting and working on still that are going to give us the ability to go with an option B, essentially, if we have to, if we can't secure the connection. The latest I've heard from staff is that there's yet new people involved on the NPS side, some of whom are, don't hang your head yet, Commissioner, they're more positive about this. We think that it's going to be a little bit better. These things move slow, but we will do our best to get that because we want it to. So
Well, I'm presuming it's not going to happen before this gets built, given the way the Park Service takes their own time on things.
the timing that we've built in would be in conjunction with permitting. I don't think that it's accurate to say it wouldn't happen, that we would not be able to get permission before the project is constructed, because obviously the improvements associated with the project could change with or without that connection. So it is really dependent on the delivery of this building. We're going to cross our fingers and work hard, and we hope for results with them.
Okay. Second, I want some clarification on the parking. We have 3 different buildings here with different parking issues or parking ratios. The condo, what is the parking ratio for the condo? Because presumably only condo residents will be parking in that structure.
Correct. The parking ratio for the condos alone is 1.39.
Okay.
So over the site in general for residential uses, we have about a 0.9. So
Right, so
essentially
that-
what we've done is we have a lower ratio, a substantially lower ratio on the apartment side, lower than several of the projects you've seen recently, and allocated a little bit more of the parking over to the condos.
On the
because of-
condo, is the parking being sold separately from the units?
Yes. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
The marketplace is constantly changing. If we were to put the project on the market right now, if we were
Pull the microphone
yeah,
closer.
if we were starting, yeah, are they coupled?
Yeah.
They're actually sold separately. However, when we market it, they typically come.
Marketing, I don't care. It's are they in fact sold separately? And somebody could sell it to their neighbor if they wanted to.
If I want to buy a condo without buying a parking space, can I do that?
Yes.
Exactly. And there's the freedom where if over time the spaces are, not sold in the numbers that maybe we thought, they can be then maybe given back to the HOA, they could be leased to the hotel, they could be used for a lot of different purposes.
Okay. The rental, for the rental apartments, what's that ratio?
The rental buildings parking ratio is a 0.66.
0.66. Now, it's sharing parking with the hotel in that structure, is that correct?
Yes, so what we did was, we obviously have the existing parking structure, and with the renovation and the rebuilding of certain structures, we dug more underneath the hotel and underneath North Nash Street to give us some more spaces. So it's a shared entrance, shared garage. Obviously, it will be divided and managed.
Okay, now, but will the apartment have dedicated spaces in that garage that could not be used by the hotel and vice versa?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other commission questions? So right now at the rebuilt trail, if you're turning into the existing Keybridge Marriott in what is to become Mead Street, you have to go up slightly like you're going up a driveway apron. Is that expected to continue to be the case with the new development?
Grading. It's going to match the existing grade? It'll match the existing grade.
So turning from Lee Highway, you'll still go up a little bit over the trail.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Jessica Mack with VICA, the civil engineer on the project. So with the recent improvements that were done with the Custis Trail and Lee Highway, we will be maintaining those grades as to not interrupt Custis Trail. So yes, that is, you will ramp up to meet the trail.
Great, thank you. Anything else?
Just the arrangement of the Esplanade trails looks a lot better in this version.
Yeah, so just in general, I want to say you've made a lot of great improvements to this since we saw it as an info item, and it's greatly appreciated. I think it's a better project, and I'm really thankful and impressed. With that said, I move that the Transportation Commission recommend that the County Board approve the site plan amendment, adopt the ordinance to amend the master transportation plan to add 2 new sections of street, and additionally, that the Transportation Commission finds that the vacations are substantially consistent with the comprehensive plan of Arlington County.
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Lantelmi. Any additional discussion of the motion? All those in favor? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Opposed?
Abstain.
Abstaining. All right. 9 to 0 to 1. Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes. Did I miss something?
I would like to make one comment, and that's just to echo what Commissioner Clements has said. If you recall that we approved a site plan about 3 or 4 months ago for the Holiday Inn there on Nash Street, and I think we had about 5 citizens come to comment on that. And if I recall, and any of you can correct me, their concerns were just all the other projects that are going on in that area, this being one of them, and that they were asking for more of a holistic, to go back to our earlier presentation, look at all these different projects going on in Roslyn, that very small footprint. So I do think that we should let the board members be aware in some way that there's a lot happening, and the residents there are going to be not very happy. It's going to be, during construction, it's going to be difficult, and we really don't know what the traffic pattern is going to be with all these big projects coming online in just a few years or months apart.
Noted.
And our next item is item number 6, the Ames site plan. This is a site plan info. I'll turn it over to the applicant for a presentation.
Hi, again, I'm John Schick with Wells & Associates. We're excited here tonight to showcase the Ames Center redevelopment, site plan number 1. So as everyone knows, or may not know actually, the Ames Center is in kind of the core of Roslyn. It's bounded by Nash Street to the west, Fort Myer to the east, and then the Hyatt Centric Hotel on the south side of the site. Today, the site consists of a mixed use of office. It has a gas station as well as a church. The green triangles at the top of the site show the 4 access points that serve the gas station today. And then the 5 yellows show the access points into the central part of the site where the office is. Then the gray triangles show the 2 access points for the hotel on the south side, even though they are not part of this application. This shows the rendered site plan. So as you can see, we're proposing to redevelop kind of the central part of the site and construct 2 towers, both the north and south tower. The gas station and church at the north site will continue to be served by the 4 access points shown in green, and then access will be consolidated for the central part of the site, as shown in the 2 yellow triangles, one along Fort Myer, one along Nash. And then the blue shows loading for the site, which would be along Fort Myer, and it would be adjacent to the Hyatt Centric's loading zone. In total, we would have about 780 residential dwelling units, 5,800 or so square feet of office, and then 9,300 square feet of retail. So an MMTA was prepared. We are in the process of addressing comments, I would say, and we are planning to resubmit. 19 study intersections were looked at with this one. It was scoped with DES staff. The existing peak hours were 7:30 to 8:30 and 4:45 to 5:45, so consistent with the Keybridge Marriott study. All the study intersections, again, were found to operate currently at acceptable levels of service. And then queuing was observed to be generally with the typical commuter peak hours. So the existing program, 162,000 square feet of office in comparison to the residential dwelling units, office and retail mixed use project that's proposed, would have an increase of about 67 a.m. peak hour trips, 91 p.m. peak hour trips. As you can see here, these were the pipeline developments that were included in the study. As shown in gray, we are currently updating the MMTA, which will include both the Holiday Inn and the Keybridge Marriott. And then, so the results show that, consistent levels of service, and in general, overall intersections as a result of this development would increase about 2 seconds or less. And then again, some traffic signal time modifications could mitigate the increases. This one showcases the transit facilities. So we're essentially adjacent to the Roslyn Metro Station, and the site area is also well served by bus routes. This slide showcases the pedestrian circulation. As you can see, the main feature of the site is the 18th Street corridor that's going to come right through the central part of the site, in between the north and south towers. As shown with the stars, we have bike racks on either side of the plaza. And then the purple showcases essentially that we have, good pedestrian connections, and we are constructing the mid-block crossing on Nash Street. And then eventually, when the tunnel does get filled in along Fort Myer, there'll be another mid-block crossing there, connecting the 18th Street corridor further to the east. The O lines showcase the bike routes. So along Nash Street, there'll be a bike lane, and then eventually there'll be a cycle track along the frontage of Fort Myer Drive. So the plaza is kind of split into two levels just due to the topography. There's an upper level and a lower level of the plaza. So this shows the upper level, which is on the Nash Street side of the site. And all these red triangles essentially show where building access is. I'm not going to go to each one, but you can see there's numerous access points to the north lobby as well as the office. This one does the same thing for the lower level. So on the Fort Myer side, again, shows access to the southern buildings lobby as well as retail spaces. And then there's also, as shown with the yellow triangle, there'll be a bike room access there that will allow bicyclists access to a corridor to go back and use the elevator to access internal bike rooms. So this really shows kind of the 18th Street corridor in detail. The corridor is 60 feet wide, kind of at its pinch point there where the elevator is shown by the star. The staircase that will go through there is 14 feet. Again, it's going to include an upper and a lower plaza due to the topography of the site. And then there will be an elevator provided for ADA accessibility. The plaza is going to feature many public amenities, including seating areas. It's going to be lined by retail as well. And again, the bike racks are also shown on this slide on either side of the plaza along Nash Street and Fort Myer. This is a rendering of the upper level plaza. So this is on the Nash Street side looking down towards Fort Myer. You can see the stairs as well as the landscape areas and the public amenities throughout. Again, this is on the Fort Myer side, kind of looking up. You can see, there's going to be retail uses, and the 18th Street corridor is anticipated to carry a lot of pedestrians, through the core of Roslyn, connecting to the metro, and then areas to the west. This showcases the nearby bicycle facilities. As you can see, the closest bike share station is located at Wilson and Fort Myer with 30 docks. So then to talk about parking a little bit, the residential will be served by 630 parking spaces, equating to about a 0.8 space per dwelling unit. And then shown there are the 10 spaces for the retail and the 6 for office. On the right side shows that we will comply with both Class 1 and Class 3 requirements for bicycle parking. And then 2% at a minimum EV parking spaces will be provided to meet LEED requirements. We'll have the ability to up that and have the wiring in place. This shows the preliminary TDM program. A few things to hit on here in the facilities. We'll have the transportation information displays in the building lobbies, bicycle parking storage in the buildings. The 18th Street corridor is the major feature of the site through the middle of the north and south tower. Both Nash Street and Fort Myer Drive, the streetscapes will be improved, and we will comply with the sector plan for streetscape sections. And then the removal of the Nash Street slip lane, which I should have pointed out earlier, but will be removed, which is also in compliance with the sector plan. Thank you.
Is there any staff presentation on this or not at this time? No, okay. Do you, by any chance, have any renderings of the street cross sections or the streetscape or anything with you at this time? Nash? Thanks. So I believe this what's shown here between the two curbs is not consistent with the sector plan for Nash or with the Core of Roslyn study for Nash. Can you speak to that?
Sure, and I'll let Jane Kim, who's also here, can help out with this, but we've been working with DES staff on this, and this is kind of where we've landed. So we have the bike lane, along the west side of the street, the 1401 side, along with parking on either side as the 2 travel lanes. And yeah, and then the parking along our frontage will also facilitate short-term parking, pick up and drop off, lay-by for the residential lobby.
Okay. So this curb-to-curb width, which is, I'm trying to read it here, 46.3 feet or something like that, is that the full total of curb-to-curb width that we expected to achieve in the sector plan or in the Core of Roslyn study? Or is it short for some
I believe
reason?
the sector plan had 47 feet.
And staff is not ready to comment at this time? Is that what I'm getting? Okay, thank you.
47 feet is in the sector plan.
So then I'm just going to say right now that I strongly urge you to come back with something consistent with the sector plan before this comes back for action. Just for those on the commission who may not have the sector plan memorized, the sector plan calls for protected bike lanes in both directions on Nash Street in this area, and I believe not for parking on that side of the street. Any other questions or comments on this info item, Commissioner Buck?
Just going to comment on the parking. It's entirely too much for a residential complex that is directly across the street from a metro entrance.
I would endorse that.
Anybody else? Commissioner Buck?
Any thought to treatments for that mid-block crosswalk for this 18th Street right-of-way? It's just sort of shown as a high-vis ladder crosswalk going through parking. Any thought, is this an appropriate street for any kind of a raised crossing? Any other potential improvements to make this a kind of marquee crossing in sort of in character with the other rights-of-way there?
Going once, going twice. Commissioner Lantalmy.
This is more for staff. Do we have any idea of what the time frame for getting rid of the Fort Myer Tunnel? Any clue how, it's, I know it's in the sector plan, of course, but it's, something we all want to have gone, but it seems to keep receding.
I believe it's a couple years away, but we're about to update the
That I know.
CIP, so 2027 in the
Thank
current
you.
CIP. There we go.
Thank you.
Last chance. Once, twice, thrice. Thank you very much. We will see you at site plan review.
Our last item is other business. Staff has 2 items. The Shirlington Road Bridge open house has finally been scheduled, and that will be March 30th at the Shirlington Library. And our next meeting of this group is April 2nd. We are likely not to have this room because of the county board needing it for a work session. So we're still wrestling with that, but I think we're going to be across the hall.
Okay. I really like Navy League as a room, FYI.
Is that a hint?
It's a little spaciouser.
Okay.
So that would be great. I have one more
Available, we can use that.
additional item, and that is it is my firm understanding that this is the last meeting with which we will have Commissioner Calkins as a member of the commission. So I would like to express my deep appreciation for all of Commissioner Calkins' contributions over the last 3 years. Implore her once again not to go. And wish her all of the best of luck and require her to come back if she changes jobs.
It's been fun. Looking forward to getting more nights back.
We are adjourned.